2 of the Research to Practice Transit Symposium. My name is Chad Riding, and I am from Caltrans Division of Planning and Modal Programs Management. We are looking forward to today's session, which is focusing on transit data. And this symposium is hosted by Caltrans, California Department of Transportation, the University of Florida Transportation Institute, UC Davis Transit Research Center, American Public Transportation Association, and the Mineta Transportation Institute. So as you can see from the schedule for today, we have the opening session with Dr. Brendan Hemley, who is Senior Advisor at the University of Toronto. Following that, there will be a 15-minute break, and then a session on passenger counts and passenger origin/destination. I will be moderating that session as well. There'll be another 15-minute break, followed by a session on bus stop spacing, moderated by Dr. Jacob Yan at the University of Florida. There'll be another 15-minute break, and we will end with a session on research in transit, advancing research at public transit agencies. And that will be moderated by Michael Eichler. Thank you again to the sponsors of this event. And thanks to the steering committee members who worked diligently in helping put this event on. And thanks to Caltrans employees Wendy Moran, Caitlin Chikansky, and Heather Anetto for helping get some of the graphics off the ground and sending you those reminder emails. Of course, thanks to all of the session participants. This session is available for certification maintenance credits from the American Institute of Certified Planners. You can find the link here, and you can also search for it online. If there are any technical issues or you have any questions for the panel members, please feel free to email me at chad.writing@dot.ca.gov. And thank you very much. Just wanted to share that, again, the American Institute of Certified Planners has this on its schedule, and you can find the event at the website. You can also search for it under the key name Research to Practice Transit Symposium. So without further ado, we would like to introduce Brendan Hemley from the University of Toronto. He has several years' experience in the transit data arena, and he has a great PowerPoint presentation for us about data in transit agencies in North America. So turning it over to you, Brendan.
Thank you, Chad, and I'll share my screen. Is that there?
Looks great.
Okay, thank you, Chad. So I've been asked to sort of set the stage for the issue of applying transit data and analytics research into practice. And I'm happy to do this. I'm coming from a rather unusual situation to do so. So my agenda is as follows. I'm going to briefly talk about where I'm coming from. Then I'm a big fan of history. I'm going to talk about the evolution and that it's been a long time coming to this point. Then I'll talk about challenges, first from the transit agency side of the point of view, and then from the academic point of view. And talk about, I believe we've come to a point of convergence of interest, and talk about some of the research themes, some of the exciting research that is being done on using transit ITS data in particular, and then some suggestions of what can be done. So I've had a rather unique career, and it's sort of put me in an interesting situation where I really, all my career, all my life, I've been trying to bridge the gap between the research community and the transit practitioner community. I worked at the Indiana University Institute for Urban Transportation with George Smirk. And then I had originally pursued an academic career, but diverted into the Canadian Urban Transit Association, which is the Canadian counterpart to APTA, where I was responsible for first for research, R&D coordination, and had a really cool responsibility developing an applied research program called the Strategic Transit Research Program, and then became responsible for all of the technical activities at CUDA, workshops, conferences, speakers, and national statistics included, and as well as the research. Then 23 years ago, I became an independent consultant, and I've been involved in both Canada and the US, done projects for APTA, ITS America, US DOT, as well as a number of Canadian organizations. But in parallel to all that, I've been very involved in sort of the academic side as well. I've been very involved in TRB, chair of the Public Transportation Planning Development Committee, and recently chair of the Public Transportation Group. And I taught at U of T for 10 years, a graduate course on public transportation, and then most recently, I've been helping them with their recent Transit Analytics Lab, and we organized the International Symposium on transit ITS data. So you can sort of see I've been in a unique position to sort of think about this question about how do we get research on data into practice. So, but given the long span of my career, I'm in a pretty good position to talk about the history, the evolution, because I've lived it all myself, and this has been a constant area of interest. I'm not a technologist. I'm interested in the effective use of technology for efficiency and effectiveness, and data has always been something of considerable interest to me. So for those who may not realize, think this technology is all pretty recent, it's not. The first CAD AVL systems appeared in Europe and Canada in the 1980s. In 1988, I actually organized the first international conference on AVL for CUDA. And that conference talked a lot about the operations and the use of the AVL and for security and incident management. But it also highlighted that you could use the data for planning purposes. And so in 1991, I organized and managed a report of the use of AVL APC data for planning and management. But the evolution's been slow. The seminal project in TCRP Report 113 that I was part of the team and led by my colleague Peter Firth. A couple of years later, took some more time. Some suppliers start providing analytic modules. 2014, first transit data workshop, which brought together a bunch of academics interested in applied research using AFC data. And then finally, Transit Data 2020, and we're in a couple other TCRP reports of considerable interest. So it's been a long time coming, and just to highlight, this is one of the inventory of applications that was identified way back in 1991 that a few transit systems had already gotten involved in. But as you probably are all aware, it's only recently that things have really started to blossom, and there's been a much wider range of applications and interests related to the data. So the question is, why? Why is it taken so long? So I'm first going to talk about some of the challenges from the transit agency side, and then from the academic side. The basic, these are personal perspectives. It's based on my following these issues for such a long time. But there's a fundamental issue. The transit industry is really not research oriented. Research does not fold nicely into the activities of transit agencies. And I will try to give a personal perspective of why that is. So, research and innovation, I should say, more broadly, and then I'll come back to data more specifically. So I view the transit industry world in 4 tiers. And at the top tier, There's a small number, and the numbers are my just personal, no documents or measurement of any kind. These are just my perspectives on the relative size of each of these groups. But there's a small number of cutting edge transit agencies that I would call innovators or optimizers in any given domain. There's nobody that is across the board, but you think about, especially in Europe or Asia, places like RATP in Paris or Transport for London or Singapore Land Transport Authority or Hong Kong MTR. I mean, everybody recognizes these as really leaders, and sometimes it's because they're trying to maximize profits, and others because there's just a culture that supports that. The bottom tier, secondly, those are the small transit agencies that are provided with minimal resources to be able to carry out their basic support for those that need that mobility. And they're never going to be given the resources or expertise or tools to really go beyond that minimal role that politicians have assigned to them. Second from the top is what I would call best practices. That's sort of when I go to a conference, and I go to lots of conferences, and sort of say, yeah, that's solid stuff. That's really good. As opposed to the cutting edge where that is really cool. That is something that really stands out as unusual. But in my estimation, best practices really is still a minority of the total industry. So what does that leave? That leaves the majority of transit agencies that really are following standard practice. The policy boards want a plan. They want the plan to be as good as can be done for the amount of resources that they're going to assign. And they just want the plan to be delivered using standard operating procedures that ensure that it's consistently delivered. And when there's problems, to get back to the plan as quickly as possible. They're not looking for optimization. They're not looking for innovation. And it's really makes it very difficult to make those arguments. So this is my worldview of the transit industry, and it explains why, any agency might have individuals that are interested in innovation or research, but the interior barriers they're going to face are pretty substantial. Now, that means that transit's primarily an operations-driven, risk-averse industry relying on standard operating procedures, and it's in the public eye, in the fishbowl. If there are any mistakes, they get out there very quickly. In addition, they have complex procurement and data protection rules in order to protect public accountability and transparency, but they are a hindrance to taking risks. Innovation, research involves taking risks. Resources are constrained, so there's a need to prove the value of research. And vendors and consultants who do innovation and research really only respond to industry RFPs. So if the industry is not asking for that, they're not going to be searching to provide it. The research, innovation, and use of data are hard sells. But I feel that data analytics is really a promising application that will make acceptance of research and innovation easier over time. Now, in terms of data itself and the use of data and analytics, it's been a long time coming. A fundamental problem is the fact that the systems that create that data, the AVLs, CAD AVLs, and AFCs, were not designed with data and use in mind. CAD AVL was designed for security and incident management, and so it's totally operations driven. AFC was for revenue protection and auditing and things of that sort. Using smart card data to develop origin destination tables was not on anybody's mind when these systems were originally deployed. And there are many other challenges. I won't go into that. Maybe in the question period we could come back to if it's of interest. But I wrote for the US DOT a discussion paper in 2015 about some of these challenges, and there are many. A lot of agencies have overcome these challenges, but I was apt to talking to one middle-sized agency, and they were just still facing the exact same challenges I documented it 8 years ago. What about researchers? Well, I guess I know a lot of academics, and there's a growing number of ones that really are interested in applied research. But I guess my tongue-in-cheek question is, what's the purpose of doing applied research if it's never applied? So there are a lot of reasons for this. Applied research is generally not valued in the engineering academic system. Somewhat more in planning, but even there's a lot of theoretical research. And academics, the whole system that they face to progress in their careers means they have to publish in academic journals, and those are journals that require methodological innovations and are really not, for the vast majority of them, interested in applications to applied research. Academics need data in order to do that research. And that has changed. It is changing. It used to be incredibly difficult, but now there's more and more publicly available data because of open data policies, new tools, technology tools like that create passive data. In some cases, there's private data, but that means requiring partnerships and agreements. There's a lot of been work on micro mobility and TNCs along those lines. But one of the things that academics don't quite understand is often is that if they want data, they have to provide something that is of value to the transit agency. They need partners. They need to be able to provide something of use. And this requires communication and trust, and really developing that, because there is no such thing as free data. And everything has a cost in terms of the energy, the cleaning up, the providing it, ensuring that there's no problems. So from my point of view, dissemination remains a fundamental challenge for applications. Journal articles only reach other academics. Private partners often don't want to share data because they want to keep it confidential, because it's intellectual property that they're competing with other organizations. Conferences, I go to a lot of conferences. At best, you can get PDFs, but there is an enabler that's being developed, the TIDES specification. John Levin has been spearheading, and he's in the last session today. Maybe I assume he'll talk about it, and I will talk about the end as well. TRB is really a home for a lot of this, and that's why I've been involved for 40 years. But it really brings together primarily the small number of transit agencies that are interested in best practices, as well as consultants and other academics. Some universities do workshops for practitioners, and that's a growing trend, I would believe. But dissemination through placement of students in organizations is really perhaps the most valuable thing that happens, and very valuable for both the students and for the transit agencies. Unfortunately, that's a long-term process. However, I've observed, with some optimism, that there's a growing convergence of interests around the use of data, particularly ITS data, and the analytics that can emerge from that, to practitioners and their interest in building a more data-driven transit industry. So in the transit industry, there's been a growing interest in ITS data. But I think a growing recognition of the potential to create information, not just, but transform the data into information that can be used to enhance effectiveness and efficiency. I think there's a growing recognition even among senior management and policy boards that It's a strategic resource in decision making. There's more and more talk about business intelligence and data analytics. I think there's a growing understanding and use of the KPIs that emerge from the data. Growing interest in dashboards, some attempts in decision support systems, and then open data is sort of underlying, and how that fits in is an ongoing discussion. In the academic world, I think there's also increased focus on data and analytics. Technologies that create the data are more mature. That makes them easier access to the data. There are new visualization and analytic tools that are becoming more commonplace. Increased discussion of use cases. And I think a small but growing number of academics have figured out ways to do a dual track approach where they can combine academic research with applied research. Not easy, but I see more and more of it. And then there are things I'm going to highlight. Shout out to GRB, and I played a role in this creation of a transit data committee that has been super active in organizing webinars and bringing together both academics and consultants and practitioners that are interested in the use of data. And there's a small but growing number of universities that really are putting an emphasis on transit applications using transit ITS data. And I've listed a couple of the initial ones that were involved in some of the early workshops. So I'm going to go through very briefly just to give you a flavor of all the things I've seen this data being used for. In the 2015 report, I came up with a typology, and I've slightly modified it, but it's basically data can be used for systematic monitoring, dashboards, executive management, KPIs. A lot of it on service operations planning. The first ones, of course, are first areas of analysis are on-time performance and schedule adherence, running time analyses. This is a new one, origin destination tables, academics. This has always been a holy grail, but one is seeing a growing number of transit agencies, small but growing number, that have recognized the power that you can derive from developing origin destination tables through smart card data. And then also operator performance is another area of focus. Data can be used for strategic analysis, major redesigns, campaigns that can be used for a number of tactical analysis, delays by intersection, locations for priority treatment, excessive stop dwell time, stop consolidation. I think there's a session about that later on today. Fare evasion, exploration, data mining, areas like safety and accessibility. And then decision support systems for service restoration or detour management and so on. The themes of research I've seen, and I'm just going to flash through these, but of course, academics are very interested in methodological themes. These are less interested practitioners, but again, it's part of that dual track of being able to get published. There has been a fair amount of emphasis on this from academics. Methodology to clean data, new technologies to collect data, the OD inference engines I've mentioned before, accuracy of new methodologies, transit assignment, capacity versus vehicle scheduling, so forth and so on. Some of the other themes, the sort of analyses one has seen over the recent years, analysis of travel behavior, bus stop, route choice, disruptions, demand, knowledge about mobility and behavior, sources of delay, where do you focus priority treatments, TSP and reserved lanes, on-time performance, overloads and pass-ups, service planning and optimization. And new horizons, use of passive data, such as Wi-Fi traces in subways, behavior in disruptions, what do people do, crowding, how many are going to take TNCs versus waiting it out versus taking replacement buses, predictive analytics, passenger loads is a big topic these days, and COVID restoration and accessibility and equity and dashboards for senior management. just throw in a couple things I think we need to see more of. A broader perspective on effectiveness and linking performance to customer experience. The right-hand part of that chart is what we as technical people traditionally measure, but but it has to be linked to perception of the quality and measurement of satisfaction. And I see more and more efforts to do this. This chart actually comes from the European Standard on Quality of Service in Public Transport, which appeared in, well, 15 years ago. Other things, price elasticities. I was very happy to see the presentation yesterday. On the WMATA fare model and elasticities. Other things about elasticities to support operations, transit in the new mobility, and data fusion for new modes, new sources of data such as connected automated vehicles and smart cities and so forth. So a few suggestions of what can be done. Going back to my worldview, you can sort of see now we need more the kinds of applications that the cutting edge develop. Those can be useful over time to inform best practices. But the biggest thing is, how do we move the majority of transit systems that are following standard practice into best practice? And from my point of view, dissemination is a really important, and how to encourage adoption. And that has to do with things like, procurement and research, and there's some positive developments in that regard. But transit agencies, this is a continuous struggle, but they have to build the internal case for data analytics to policymakers and to senior management. And I see more and more of that, sort of focusing on use cases, return on investment, more focus on visualization and dashboards, and facilitating technology transfer. I mentioned the Transit ITS Data Exchange Specification, TIDES. The part of this is to standardize the way data is structured, so that not only it would enable applications that are developed in one place to be shared with others easily. Right now, you go to a conference, you see something cool and then what did you get at best? A PDF, and you would have to build it basically from scratch. This would enable agencies to transfer applications much more easily. There's a critical role from associations in all this, and that can't be underestimated. And then capacity building efforts as well. This is sort of an interesting development as I look at the evolution of data and its use, and I sort of come out with a data governance and management arc. The technical challenges were substantial, and we could talk about that, but and that took a long time to get the data quality assurance up to a level where it was trustworthy to be used for applications. And then last 10 years, one starts seeing ad hoc applications being developed, usually one by one, focusing on-time performance, or passenger loads, or passenger pass-ups, or bus stop consolidation. And each time that requires inter-organizational discussions between the groups that want that kind of data and do those analyses, and the ones that are involved in its application. So planning and operations, planning and finance. And each time you have to resolve, okay, who's going to do it, who has access to the data, who's going to maintain it, and so forth. How do we ensure security, so forth. But over time, as there's a multiplication of these discussions, it leads to it has to eventually lead to, if to be successful, to leadership buy-in. And that where there's a growing recognition by senior management and policy boards that this is really valuable stuff. And eventually that then leads to, okay, if that's the case, we're not going to tackle this each time, starting all over the discussions. We really need to have a plan, a framework that enables and for business intelligence and data governance strategic plan to address organizational and technical issues. What kind of expertise is needed? I'm seeing more and more job descriptions for business analysts and data scientists and data engineers, which is great. But where do they fit in? Who's got access to the data? How should it be handled? And then eventually that hopefully will lead to enterprise deployment where this becomes a routine function, that there's an ongoing sort of research and technical support that uses the data, that knows about the data, that has the expertise and the tools, and has resolved the pain points between different departments. But in parallel, there's been this growing interest in research and innovation, which supports all this. And there's going to be a really interesting session later this afternoon, I believe it's between 3 and 4, with some of the leaders who have really gotten into trying to promote research within transit agencies. And in fact, I'm chair of the Transit ITS committee called APTS at ITS Canada. And a year ago, I wrote a scoping paper, brief paper, I think it's 10 pages long or so, where I tried to inventory these kinds of efforts to promote innovation research. And that include it's changed its name, but the LA Metro Office of Innovation, a growing trend towards chief innovation officers in transit systems. TransLink has a process for unsolicited proposals and also for academic research. New York MTA has a very high profile one, Transit Innovation Partnership. And WMATA recently, or a year ago, I guess, developed a multi-year academic research partnership focusing on data analytics. I know two of these efforts are going to be represented in the meeting this afternoon. There's also been transit system participation in R&D collaboration programs. And my T-Transit Lab has been around for a long, long time. I'm part of the U of T's Transit Analytics Lab, TAL, and others as well. The FTA had a COVID transit research program. I don't know how that's gone. I should sit back and look at it, but again, it was specifically aimed at trying to stimulate research. So what's this going to require? This is going to require collaborations between academics and the industry. As I mentioned, academics want data, but there's no such thing as free data. So there has to be the partnership, and it takes time to build trust and mutual understanding. And there are a couple of areas where this can be built. Data quality assurance methodologies, guidance on uses, training, new analyses. And I think it's going to also require refocusing educational programs. Data science courses. U of T just developed a master's level course on data science for transit analytics. And I think others will do the same. It would be nice if somehow the academic system, placed more value in applied research. But like I said, some agencies, some academics have managed to figure out a dual track approach. There can be practicum courses on focusing on business analytics. And then as the long term, with this collaboration, one of the big outcomes of it is it helps to place bright students into transit systems with prior knowledge of what the environment is, what the data, how it's structured, what its challenges are. So that's very, very useful. Sorry, excuse me. And it really will require changes to procurement processes. I know a couple places that have managed to do that, where they've come up with a way of enabling unsolicited proposals or sole source efforts with academics, because research is not consulting, and yet in most cases it's treated the same way. Couple examples from the U of T's TAL Transit Analytics Lab. Just to illustrate, this is the sort of thing that I think a growing number of academic centers are trying to focus on. Looking at the different ways that different modes, different applications, different areas of focus, and a couple examples of research projects recently that they've conducted. One developing a bus bridging decision support toolkit to optimize the replacement, bus bridging replacement, and which routes you draw the buses that you need from. Timetable development with transfer optimization in a multi-depot environment. The transit equity dashboard. There's a lot of several efforts underway in different universities about looking at equity and accessibility. And another project was on social media analytics, looking at the deciphering and analyzing social tweets and so forth, in terms of getting some market research from that, as well as operational benefits. I co-organized with the director of TAL, Amr Shalabi. The Transit Data 2020 was a huge effort and successful effort to bring together both academics and practitioners, or 250 participants. 2/3 were practitioners, 100 speakers, 19 countries. All of the proceedings are on the YouTube channel that's listed there. All the recordings of the sessions. And the presentations are available, although we're having a little problem with the website right now. So to wrap up, here are a couple key resources I really strongly recommend. The U of T's Transit Analytic Lab, there's the Symposium, but there's been some good TCRP reports. The TCRP report 235 really sort of laid the groundwork for TIDES, then the TIDES exchange specification GitHub site. And as I said, if you're really interested in learning more about the state of the art, as well as state of the practice, get involved as a friend to TRB's Committee on Transit Data, AP090. And there's the website and LinkedIn page. And then the US DOT has had a discussion on the on some of these things as well. So to end, I think that the future is data-driven, will be data-driven, and is extremely exciting. And I thank you for the opportunity to present this. And there's my email. I think there's going to be an effort to make presentations available, but if you want to get the presentation, get the references, please feel free to send me an email. Thank you. I will stop sharing my presentation if I can. Oops, sorry.
Okay, thank you so much for that presentation. It was very interesting, Brendan. Lots of things that can be done and should be done and need to be done in regards to transit data. And so we have a few questions to kind of kick off this conversation.
Sure.
I guess, and this is a very complicated question, but what does success look like in the world of transit data?
I think that is setting up a framework so that the data is available, the quality of it is assured, it is clear who has access to it? Who are the owners of the data? How, if special applications are developed, how are they maintained? And that there basically is a forum that where the data is already there and in formats that are easy to use, and it's clear organizationally where the responsibilities lie. So it's all that developing a strategic, it's not only dealing with the technical questions of quality assurance, but it's also dealing with a strategic framework to have that strategic discussion and incorporate it into the enterprise. So it's an ongoing process. You don't have to try to reinvent how do we even get access to the data, or what data do we have available, and then you can start building on an ongoing basis the tools that you might need, new tools, or you can do both the analyses or develop the new tools that would be useful. For example, like I mentioned yesterday's presentations about WMATA's FAIR model. I mean, that's a new tool which builds on the fact that they had already structured their AFC data and other sources of data, and had developed the inference engine for developing planning information from that smart card data. And that enabled them then to develop a new tool for fair policy analyses and analysis of elasticities, which like I said, has not been one of the big focus of research groups to date.
And what's interesting is that what kind of came to mind during your answer is, it does seem that there is. It's hard to say that there's a dichotomy, because most dichotomies are false dichotomies, but between the data that you want as a transit agency and the data that you want as a transit user. So, for example, I see a lot of different transit metrics through my job here at Caltrans, but as a transit user, when I do use transit, I always try to answer those questions because I basically navigate through Google Maps using the transit function. It focuses a lot on a lot of that user experience data. So how hot is it? Is it the right temperature? Is it too cold? How crowded is it? Did the bus come on time? Some of those user experience issues that lead into and result in better transit outcomes at times for especially the choice users. But less so for maybe the transit agencies, that they want it to be a comfortable experience, but they may not have their pulse on that as much.
So a couple things that come to mind. First of all, there's certainly data that's maybe specifically of interest to users, to customers, that it's not something that transit agency staff would have thought of be useful in their job. And the whole area of real-time information systems, RTIS, is sort of that. I mean, that's when the CAD AVL systems were first designed, nobody thought about customer information. That just wasn't even in the glimmer of anybody's eyes, because it was for security and incident management. Then the revolution of apps came in, and all of a sudden said, people started saying, oh, well, and then Google came along, and Google Maps was developed with TriMet's help, and so forth and so on. So there's a whole stream of data that's for the customer. But sometimes you can't tell that. Sometimes data, you think it's just for this, and then it ends up being for this. For example, the CAD AVL data, well, now it's essential to populate the real-time information systems. But I'll give you another example. GTFS schedule data, which was developed for third-party applications like Google Maps and so forth. Well, a number of academics realized about 5 years ago or so, maybe a little bit more, I started seeing papers at TRB. They realized you could actually use GTFS data as a representation of the level of service of the agency. It was a very cool and simple way to sort of say, this is, and that then can be used for policy analyses to sort of say, okay, you know, how much service is being provided, when, and to who. And it's the same GTFS schedule data, but it's being used for operational purposes. And so you never know. Data can be used for the same with AFC data. Smart card data, the AFC systems were not designed for, they were designed for internal revenue protection and counting and accounting and so forth. But all of a sudden, there's this blossoming that they can be used for planning purposes, operational purposes. But they can also, then that could even be translated into dashboards for the public. So you need the framework. And I forgot in my previous question, one thing it's actually, I forgot to say, which is really critical. You can't get to the point where you have that framework unless you've got buy-in and convinced the policy board and senior management. I mean, it doesn't happen because there's too many interorganizational conflicts that have to be resolved. There has to be arbitration. There has to be resources. That doesn't happen unless the powers that be are convinced this is important. And a lot of agencies are not there yet.
And I wanted to, and kind of somewhat of a follow-up is, you talked earlier about, throughout your talk, on how there are, the people that are on the cutting edge, there are people that are the best practice, the people that do the standard data collection. And then there's, large number of agencies, particularly smaller agencies that, really do need those key resources. Speaking from different perspectives, because most of the decisions about transit and the resourcing and everything for that data collection occurs at the local level with the management, deciding to collect that data. I'm wondering if there are ways that state, or in case of Canada, provincial and federal governments might be able to help those agencies. What have you seen that's been successful in helping kind of fill that gap, and where do you think that can go?
There are certainly things that could be done. So a couple examples. To acquire technologies, I mean, the CAD AVL systems are an essential element for all of these things. And there are basic versions that just give audio visual announcements of next stops and so forth, and that's very useful. But I don't know, there's probably been about 15 states that I think I know of that have done group procurements for the small guys. Basically sort of saying, okay, and normally there's a self-serving interest. They want to standardize the reporting and simplify it and make sure that it's all the same, apples and apples. But what they do is they go out and they say, okay, we will pay for the procurement process and the technical consultants that need to be done to procure the process, and then provide, you pay for the marginal cost with your local planning funding and funding and pass through the state DOT. And so they get the tools and everybody wins. So I don't quite know why there's not been more of that, because it sounds like a very powerful mechanism. Now, in your own state, Cal ITP has been a very impressive effort. Very ambitious, especially given the number. I don't know how many, 150 small agencies or more. I don't know.
Depending on how you count, it could be as high as over 300.
Right. And trying to develop a common marketplace and the data standardization and the benefits wallet. These are all fantastic, interesting, ambitious objectives that could support, that will support primarily the small one. LA Metro and Muni, they don't they've got lots of expertise, but the small guys do not. And that's another effort on that part. Now, also, I should just say, just because you're small doesn't mean you necessarily follow that bottom category. There are some small agencies that have traditionally been more interested, have been figured out how to maneuver the system, the funding sources, or they have a university next door where they've piggybacked on that and come up with collaboration. So doesn't just because you're small doesn't mean you can't do things. I'm just sort of saying, in general, the policy boards will not provide a lot of resources when you're in a community where it takes 15 minutes to get across town in a car, and the buses only run every hour or every 90 minutes. Who's going to ride your system is pretty well predetermined. So, but there are things that can be done at the state level for sure.
And this kind of brings up one of those topics is we have the normal state, really the local transit agencies providing a lot of that data. We have been looking for a little while now at big data as being a source of that data. We have lots of information about how people travel through their cell phones, Google applications, other applications that can kind of give those big data insights, crowdsourcing also. It seems like there's a lot that can be done in that regard. We're kind of, though, at this beginning phase of where AI is starting to have a big impact in many aspects of our lives. This is kind of looking a little bit in the crystal ball here, but where do you see AI potential developments in impacting data collection, sorting, analyses processes?
Well, there will be. There's sort of, my colleague Amr Shalabi makes a distinction between three levels of analytics: descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. And it has to do with how you use the data, what tools you use, where the AI optimization certainly a predictive or might be even in the prescriptive areas. I've seen some applications there. If anybody's interested, there's been there was an FTA report last spring, and just recently there was an ENO report that looked at AI and transportation. Both of them did, and but they explained some of the applications of AI in transportation in general. Some of the applications I've seen, for example, is in machine learning for the transit signal priority, so that basically the system learns itself about the impacts of changing how many seconds it extends the green phase and things of that sort. There's a student who's looking at decision support systems for using AVL, CAD AVL for identifying bunching and gaps as they occur. I've always wondered why we haven't tackled this before. There was a very useful FTA project with PACE, oh boy, 15 years ago, which looked at, it was called TODS, TODSS. It was about developing a decision support system that would help dispatchers recognize scenarios of bunching or gaps and then make suggestions of what they could do to respond to it. So it's not just based on the individual, behavior of individual dispatchers. We're finally getting to the point where that's starting to be feasible, I think. But those are some of the sort of examples of where it will fit in. I think it's going to be, and then also just mining huge amounts of data, being able to go back and look at time series of data, and look at certain patterns of operator performance or safety analyses. Where do the accidents occur? There's all sorts of places where you could do that kind of deep dive, but you have to have the data. It has to be cleaned up, And then you have to have the people that have both the expertise and the knowledge of the AI tools. So it's coming, but it's a slow process, I think.
Yeah, it seems like, some of those key advocates for new ways to process data, to gain data, to gather data, is one of those things that is critical in that adoption for those 5% that are on the cutting edge. So it'll be interesting to see, and I would suspect in the next few years that would start to get off the ground as AI becomes more pervasive and frankly better at what it does. Um,
Yep.
just wanted to end, we just have a couple minutes. With the people that we have on, we have a variety of researchers and practitioners. What would you say is the main message you could give about improving data in North American transit agencies?
Well, there's no single answer. I mean, transit agencies have to have resolved the technical problems themselves about quality assurance. I mean, and that's a painful process. I mean, there's all sorts of issues and that are there. You can't even really start. And there's the issue of using vendor data, their modules, they provide modules. So you have to start with that. And I should underline, I hope we've finally gotten over this, but I'm still hearing it. When you specify a new transit, a CAD AVL system or an AFC system, you have to put in the RFP that the data belongs to the transit agency. I can't believe I'm still hearing this issue, because if you don't specify it in the RFP, the vendors for sure will put in boilerplate that says it belongs to them, and then you're bound for license fees forever and ever. So, I mean, I didn't even want to mention it, but I still hear that issue. So that's one. The other one is procurement is very challenging issue. How to figure out how to develop maybe special procurement rules for dealing with academics. On the whole issue of unsolicited proposals for research purposes. So that's the second one is clean data, procurement, and the academics have to build trust. They have to learn the language, they have to learn the issues, they have to provide something that's of interest to the transit agencies. And that's not going to be necessarily something they can publish in transportation research or transportation science. So, though I would say those, you start there and then you can build the collaboration and relationship.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great way to end this session. Thank you so much, Brendan, for your time and your effort in presenting that. I learned a lot myself about transit data and where we need to bring this in the future. So thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the symposium. Thank you.
Great. So we will now go on a 15-minute break. And we will return at 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time, and that would be 10:15 Pacific. Thank you. Welcome to this session on passenger counts and passenger origin destinations. We are pleased to have with us Jim Allison from Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority. Jim has been with Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority since 2000, and he is the manager of planning for new capital service projects and planning studies along that route, which runs from the Sacramento area to the San Francisco Bay Area. He is an avid bicyclist and also developed and is implementing Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority's innovative bicycle access plan. With them, we have Harsh Verma, who is a professor and consultant in the area of transportation data, really focusing on passenger data counts, amongst other things. He is also located in the Sacramento area. And finally, we have Tolu Oke, who is the founder of Odara Mobility, as well as working with Pioneer Valley Transit Authority, which is located in Massachusetts. So between 2020 and 2022, OK authored 15 federal and state grant applications that awarded PVTA with over 70 million in research and project grants. So we will start with a presentation on passenger counts by Dr. Verma and Jim Allison, and you have about 25 minutes. So take it away.
Great. Well, thank you. Hope everybody can hear me. My name is Jim Allison, and in addition to this, the biking part, I also work quite a lot on technology when it's not traditional rail infrastructure. So this is definitely a technology project. So we're going to talk today about a series of research and development initiatives that we've started I've worked on with Dr. Verma before on Wi-Fi in trains, and now this is actually years later building on that. So this is going to look at Bluetooth sensing for crowd estimation, and it will get into the use of GTFS data for occupancy data for rail operations or other transit operations. We'll be covering that. So if you can go to the next slide, Harsh.
Yes, thank you. And over
Why don't you
here,
introduce yours?
would you like me to introduce myself?
Yeah, if you could. Yes.
So, hello, I'm Dr. Harsh Verma. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Local Networks and founder of PeopleSense. We worked with Capital Corridor over the past few years on a number of interesting initiatives. And thanks, Jim, for this opportunity to participate and present along with you on this project.
So now we can go to the next slide, which I'll talk a little bit about our operations and kind of the basics of what we're doing here. So the idea was to, how can we cost effectively count people in real time? And doing this involved Bluetooth sensors that would sense people's Bluetooth devices that are on their phone, their laptop, or even their headphones. And those all have basic signatures. And this sensing device could collect that information, backhaul that information out of the train, and in this case via the on-train Wi-Fi, but it could have been over a cellular card itself. But that goes off the train in some mechanism, but we do have a Wi-Fi system that's Nomad Digital. And then that leaves the train and goes into the larger cloud onto Amazon Web Services or something like that, that would be a repository for storing this information, using it later, and we'll have slides about that. But this is a little bit about our operations in Northern California. You see the route map, which indeed does go from the Sacramento area into the Bay Area, down towards Silicon Valley. And then we see these different station names, and these are the stations in geographical order. And we have different layers of service and trains that run in there. So for instance, we don't have Auburn, Rockland, Roseville only has, and Sacramento only has one round trip, but then the core of our service is Sacramento to Oakland, and then lesser service from Oakland south to San Jose. So that's a little bit about our overall operations, but our train consist is going to be very important for this discussion. You can kind of see us counting train cars in this situation, and the trains themselves don't turn around. They go, locomotive always stays on one end, and then it travels back cab forward on the other end. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 in one direction, and then 4, 3, 2, 1 going the other direction. But regardless, the train car is a unique identifier. It's numbered. It is a data point itself. So next slide. So here's an example of data that we can collect. And what Harsh will go over is how, once you've collected the data, how do you present it to different audiences? And one of the audiences is certainly the train customer itself. And he'll go into that. But this is just to give some basics on the data points that are generated, not only from the train journey itself, that it was this train number, it started here, it ended there, it started at this time. Along the way, it hit different stations. So for instance, in this example, Fremont Station. And then it has the moving cars, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it has particular car numbers in the pink. Those are those car numbers. And then the Bluetooth sensors in those cars can pick up roughly how crowded is that train. So in this example, it's 15 people in car 1, 36 in car 2, 20, and then 32, as you can see. So that can be done in real time. And that generates data. And in fact, it generates data all the time, in the sense that it's sampled at a sampling rate. So it's always saying, I've got this much, I've got this much, I've got this much. And that builds up a picture over time of how much you have. And then the next example is just another train with a different origin destination pairing, different times. And it talks about the status of that train. And that's another important point. In this example above, we have a status of taking the sample at a station. And the other, in the blue, we have a status taking the count once it's departed the station. It's in between stations. So that is the type of environment of live information that's being generated through the PeopleSense Bluetooth sensing. So we can go to the next slide. So what that all leads to is the question of what is good data? And we'll get into this in the next couple of slides. And then I'm going to try to answer that situation. And then Harsh will talk about the next big bullet, how do we use good data? Then I'll come back in at the end about operational data. So GTFS is definitely there to help in terms of how the public would see the data. And we went through an iteration that Harsh will talk about there. So we can go to the next slide. Those are our big key steps. Okay, so I've talked about always sampling, right? So we can have different timestamps. And in this background here, we have an Excel database of just examples of samples of counts taken. And it's obvious that not everybody has Bluetooth, or they keep it off. And then the train moves along, and sometimes you're scanning people at a station. They may not be getting on your train, but nonetheless, the data is collected in its sense, oh, there's suddenly triple the number of people that you used to have. And oh, some of your people have now left, and now you get new people, new Bluetooth devices. And so the Bluetooth sensors sense this all the time. And what we see with enough samples is that you have these bulges in suddenly high counts. And we've even seen high counts as the train moves through a building that is particularly near the tracks that may have office workers, and it senses their devices. So it's really agnostic in terms of how powerful it is. And what this all leads to, whether you have or don't have a Bluetooth device, is calibrating your sample against a visual count. And you can see a calibration factor there to correct the visual count versus the scan counts. And so those become important to set up kind of the rules and get a good approximation. So you're telling people roughly how crowded that train is. It's not precise. And that you'll see later in the GTFS situation of, is precision required? Or are you getting in a range? And Harsh will talk a little bit about that. So this is the general sense of data being generated at a sampling rate and the needs to correct it. So we might throw out the data at a station, and that isn't as important to people ultimately because there's a big transition point. But as far as what's it gonna look like after people board the station, we'll have historical data for that and be able to say we would predict it's going to have a turnover about this much. Therefore, after the station, you'll have a net increase of, let's say, 8 more people. So that's a bit of an example of how the train sampling and the data has to be turned into good data. So next slide. To help with this, Harsh's team developed a mobile app so we could take a sample and do a visual count and enter that data using an app. So this can become available to our staff as operators to help with calibration, or it could be provided to passengers who want to do this themselves and maybe get some deals on coffee or something like this. So that's the concept of it, but the idea is to occasionally do visual checks is a pretty important thing to calibrate all the numbers that I talked about. So that this app can help ease that, and then it helps helps the whole thing work better. So next slide. So what this eventually leads to is that as enough samples are made, we get a pretty strong understanding of a train profile or a train personality. And that's just our convenient way of saying this is roughly when this train that's scheduled to travel at this time of the day, we would expect it to roughly look like this. And that way we get to understand when it is behaving according to its personality or behaving differently. And that can mean different things in terms of the information that is provided to the passenger, but also to us as operators. So if you're deviating from your expected personality, then that might lead us to think, what is going on? Is there a 49ers football game going on? And we would predict it's going to be more crowded on a particular train for that. And so that's a deviation from that personality. But there may be something unknown that we didn't know about. There could be a school group. There could be some conference going on. Apple's launching something in San Francisco, and suddenly everybody from Sacramento is coming down to be at that live event. And we didn't have that on our radar. Or there's a lot less travel. So why is that? And we can see this also sometimes in our operations. So the idea is that we would, over time, we begin to understand what normal looks like and what abnormal looks like. And then that can lead to predictive information and real-time information and how that's presented. So we'll go to the next slide. Let me hand it off to Harsh here, who's going to really talk about how to convey the things that I was talking about, the real-time data juxtaposed against the predicted or historical data. So Harsh, please take it away.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. So this is a slightly different perspective now of it and how GTFS took this on. On the GTFS side, we feel that this is very interesting how we went about it, and we could see that initially we were thinking alone in our own silo on our own island, and as we looked at the GTFS collective, they were thinking in their silo and in their islands, So it was really good to participate in the past few years with GTFS community. And as we looked at the different issues that are called as pulls. So that's a term which is used for a new issue or a feature or an experimental field, as they call it. It's called as a pull. And we determined the following standards were certainly worth exploring. So the first one was the GTFS RT issue or pull number 237, which is the support for multi-car crowding. And the second one was 223 for occupancy status versus occupancy percentage. And then later, as it was added 261 for adding levels, crowding levels to vehicle position, we talk about it. And then finally, exchanging predicted occupancy in GTFS itself. So in some cases, we had to push back to see if the GTFS collective teams could incorporate the perspectives of train operations in some nuanced areas. For example, as the train does not make a U-turn, as you can see, when returning, and also the car position, as Jim mentioned, does not change in most cases when the train is traveling east or west versus west to east. So the key message here is that joining with the standards is really worth it. And we definitely had to give our perspective of rail operations to the GTFS collective on that GitHub site, as you'll see, or to the Google Transit teams, because they're driving a lot of that, to think about train customer experiences rather than just bus transit experiences. So there were some experimental fields being added, and let's look at these now. So the first one, as I mentioned, is the pull number 237, which is the initial support for multi-car crowding. And this pull proposes the addition of a new field called as multi-carriage details to the GTFS RT vehicle position message that was the initial real-time message that was provided. The purpose is, again, to enable the provision of crowding data.
Okay, so we had, in engaging in these two areas, this was the initial piece. These were basically the ways that information was considered to be provided to customers. And the idea of including information on a particular car that isn't opened with the doors, for instance, our cafe car, would not be something that we would include in the data fields, but of course, all the other coach cars would be included. So the occupancy status would be shown. But if we go to the next slide, so the occupancy status had different fields, and there were initially 7 values of, and you can see them on the sidebar here: empty, to many seats available, to few seats available, standing room only, crush standing room only, full, and not accepting passengers. And these were the data fields that was thought of with the GTFS GitHub. These would be the important fields, and then there would be these other fields where no data was available or it's not boardable. And that would be the example. Not boardable would be the cafe car. So we had to look at that situation, and here's our vocabulary, if you will, versus coming out with a percentage of conveying this car is 35% full. And so you're playing against this percentage idea as being a communication tool versus actual a summary of language that you have a few seats available, or there's standing room only, or many seats available. And as it turns out in our operations, typically we have a lot of seats available, but people like to sit. There's 2 seats. Most people seek not to sit with somebody else. So the messaging and the vocabulary that was coming out of the standard was a concern for us. So if we can go to the next slide, I don't know if, okay. So then we have the next issue was looking at the crowd level relative to the vehicle position. So it acknowledges the occupancy status versus the crowd level fields in the context of vehicle position. And this was suitable for rail or heavy rail or light rail. So this
was getting the whole thing of the issue was what is actionable based off the information that we are getting. What would a rider do if they saw this information? So the GTFS community was really proposing these different levels of crowding, 5 levels of crowding based on the earlier 7 levels of occupancy status. They came up with a new 5 levels of crowding: empty, many seats available, few seats available, standing room only, crushed seating, full, not accepting passengers also there. So as we went through this whole process from 7 levels of crowding to look at 5 levels of crowding, and then looked at, okay, can we reduce that? Looked at maybe 3 levels of crowding. And this is really the heart of this presentation, because this is for the traveling public. It provides us learnings about how the public would consume this information. Jim, do you want to add anything over here?
No, I think this is the key, is that there was too much detail. So we wanted to really split it out to say that this car or that car is not crowded, but this other one does reach this higher threshold. So we modified our percentages to translate into kind of a just right range here using four levels of status. So we had to look at how the public would consume it and also how our operations was, so that our definitions match maybe the definitions that they would agree with either visually, say, well, that doesn't seem too crowded. It's not. And so the issue of empty, it's not truly empty, it's very lightly attended. So maybe next slide, in the interest of time. If you can go through this one, Harsh.
Yeah. So finally, we thought that as we are getting this information, we combine this information with some of CCJPA's post-trip ridership information to collect the conductor ticket lift-offs, the electronic tap-on, tap-off data, and combine the machine learning and generative AI to build up transformation and to see how two databases will actually advise CCJPA in its operations for various kinds of train consist, composition, conductor staffing, and provide predictive occupancy information to customers before and while they're on their journey. And this really came up with looking at the exchanging the predicted occupancy, which is there in the pull number GTFS 233. So this proposal suggests adding a column in the static files in the GTFS static for the stop times tech.txt file to describe the predicted occupancy between the current stop and the next stop. And so there is a question regarding the lead time, of course, for such predicted occupancy information and its relevance to the users, to the riders. And this includes considering, the latency involved in providing this information. So this is something which has been proposed in GTFS 233, but as it's being worked out, there has not been so much activity. So some of these pulls you might see have actually closed down because of no activity, but still means that it's really important, as in the future, possibly it can accommodate the rail agency's interest in having access to such predictive values or predictions of ridership. So these help riders plan their journeys more effectively. And so the next slide shows some of the architectural approaches that we are thinking would help combine the past ridership data with post-trip data sets and the GTFS static predicted occupancy to provide more generative transformations based on machine learning to provide information on the train consist, composition, conductor staffing. So over to you, Jim, for your closing comments.
Yeah, just to say that it's the real-time, the people sense devices really give that occupancy sense, but it can be cross-checked using that data to see if we're on target with what we would expect or what's been lifted in terms of conductor lifts. So it's kind of a way of double checking things, but then also being represented to train riders, but also to ourselves, because we can track things in real time or look at end of day reports or next day reports to see if we've missed anything about operations that has surprised us, but kind of back to what the point was earlier. So next slide. That is our contact information. Apologies for the technical issues, and if there's any questions, I'm not sure if we have the chance for that, but looking forward to the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Dr. Verma. A really interesting presentation. And we can go ahead, and if there's any questions, we can go ahead and forward them over email to you. Next, we'll hear from Tolu Oke. Let me go ahead and I will be running the slideshow.
I will be presenting on PVTA's origin destination transfer model that we developed in partnership with the UMass NARS lab. Next slide, please. As Chad mentioned, my name is Tolu Oke. I am the principal and founder of Odara Mobility, which is a consulting company. Previously, I worked as the manager of transit planning and analysis at the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority here in Western Massachusetts. And right now, I am supporting them on a part-time basis on grant-funded research. Prior to that, I worked as a consultant at Stair Davis Glave in Boston. Next slide, please. So the focus of this presentation is the PVTA work that we did. So I wanted to give a quick background of the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority's system. The PVTA is the second largest transit agency in Massachusetts. We provide service across 24 communities in Hampshire and Hampden County. We operate 34 fixed routes and with about 200 buses. And in FY19, so pre-pandemic, we were operating or providing about 10 million rides. And since COVID, we have gotten back to about 70% of our pre-COVID levels. So here on the right, I'm showing just a PVTA system so you can see how it is spread out across a large area and the routes that we operate. Next slide, please. So in 2020, the FTA came out with a notice of funding under the Accelerating Innovative Mobility projects to fund projects that promote innovative approaches to improve transit. And PVTA saw that, and we wanted to be able to capitalize on that opportunity to do something that was beyond our daily operations. We wrote a proposal in partnership with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, which is our local MPO, and University of Massachusetts Amherst, NARS lab in the Civil Engineering and Environmental Department, Dr. Jamil Oke and Mohammed Abdulazim. Next slide, please. The goal of PVTA's project was to provide a more seamless travel experience for PVTA riders. We wanted to install on-bus ticket validators and integrate trip planning and fare payment apps, which at that point, we used Transit app for trip planning and our riders used a different app for fare payment. And we wanted to integrate those two apps. And lastly, to develop an innovative origin destination transfer model with a build out of a data visualization dashboard. Now going to more details specifically on the ODX piece of this and the dashboard. Next slide, please. So prior to 2020, PVTA riders primarily paid for their fares using cash and with some passes, though the passes, they had to go to certain locations to purchase them, and so they were not as widespread. During COVID, PVTA, so in July 2020, PVTA launched its mobile ticketing app, which offered the same fare products available outside the app. And this provided a rich source of account-linked data with boarding locations. So as you can see on the map here, we have whenever a rider got on the bus, they would activate their mobile ticket, and it was visually validated by the bus driver. But on the right here, I wanted to show this map showing the locations where tickets were activated around our bus stops. So you can see it's not an exact overlay on the bus stops, but we had a very detailed information about where these people were, where our riders were activating their tickets. And this provided us an opportunity to expand analytics and to do something more innovative. Next slide, please. So prior to the mobile ticketing data, the main source of data that PVTA used for network planning was the automatic passenger counters. As many people know, the APCs provide information on boarding volumes and alighting volumes for each route and at the stop level, day level, time level. And so we, on the right map here, I'm showing one of PVTA's routes, the G1. And you can see from the APCs, we're able to have a good understanding of the volumes at each bus stop and how people were were getting on and off the routes and the system. But the APCs are unlinked, and so we have no idea about, for each person or individual that got on, where did they get off, how far did they go on the route, did they just go to the next stop, or did they go from one end to the other end. And so the mobile data provided us this very good information that we could use to infer destinations and locate destination locations for each trip. So, on the right here, I'm showing with the mobile data, we were able to see, for example, that on the G1 route, 36% of our riders were traveling primarily in the northern part of the route. 55% were traveling on the southern end of the route, and only about 9% were traveling across the north and the south end of the route. And so this was really the motivation for the for the origin destination transfer model, to be able, so that we could look at this kind of information at the network level for every route, and to have more detailed information for network planning. Next slide, please. Here, I'm just going to do a quick overview of the ODX framework. We developed this in partnership with the UMass Amherst research team. So we see as inputs to the model, we have the mobile ticketing data, which we refer to as noisy data, because as we saw earlier, it's not an exact overlay on our bus stops. There still needs to be some work to clean it. We have the APC data, which provides the ridership totals for the full population. However, it was unlinked. The mobile ticketing data, I forgot to mention, provided us about 17% sample of our full population, but we have the linked information for that. And then the GTFS data, which showed us information about exactly where our buses were at each point during the day. There are a number of methods that are in the ODX model, but I'm going to highlight two here. Trip chaining, we use that to infer the boarding locations of the mobile ticket activations. So, for example, when a ticket is activated, we would infer the exact bus stop that the person was getting on using the mobile ticketing data and also the GTFS data to see at the point when a trip was activated or a ticket was activated, what buses were in that vicinity and at that stop. And then we would also infer the alighting location of that trip based on future activations from the same ID, and then the transfer information as well when necessary. Like I mentioned, the mobile ticketing data was only about a 17% sample. And so the other method I'm highlighting here is the IPF, which we use to expand the information that we were getting from the ODX model to the full population. And at the end, we developed this ODX matrix, which showed total passenger movement across PVTA system. So the ODX was very useful, but we wanted it to make it even more usable within the PVTA. The team at UMass decided to help us with the build out of a dashboard. Next slide, please. And this dashboard was going to be an interactive one that allowed us that provided maps and graphs to help users explore the data that was coming out of the model. Next slide, please. So here I'm just showing a full network of arc maps showing where across the system where people were getting on in red and where they were getting off the buses in blue. So you can see we have now, from just having those point information before, now we have these full arc maps of where people are, how people are moving and propagating through PVT's service network. Next slide, please. Here I'm just showing just one. So before I show the full network, here I'm showing just one route, which is PVT's P20 route. And you can see for someone who got on, say, at the Holyoke, the red point, where they got off, and so on and so forth. And so for at the route level, we were also able to see how people were moving through individual routes, as well as at the system level, how they were moving across various routes on the system. Next slide, please. The dashboard also provided us with information about our fares and how our users, the riders, were using the fares across the day and across the various fare types that we provided. So the pie chart here on the bottom shows about 34%, 35% of our riders were using one-ride tickets, a proportion using the day passes, and 31-day passes and 7-day passes. And interestingly, comparing this data to prior to the mobile ticketing data, we are seeing an uptick in the number of 7-day and day passes that our riders have been purchasing with the mobile ticketing app. And on the bottom right, we just see also some spit outs of the model showing the number of transfers that are happening on each route. Next slide, please. Here, I wanted to show a quick example of a full ODX. So between Holyoke and Amherst, PVTA does not have a direct route. And so with the ODX outputs, we're able to see about a rough estimate of how many people are doing this trip going from Holyoke to Northampton, and then transferring to another route in Northampton to continue their trip to Amherst. And one use case of this, based on these outputs, PVTA was able to secure funding to actually provide a direct service for parts of this trip to allow people to go from Springfield to Northampton on a direct bus route without the need to transfer in between. So next slide, please. Lastly, I just wanted to mention some of the use cases that PVTA has been using the outputs of the model for. We've been using it for network planning to identify flow distributions and high and low demand areas. We've used it to identify service gaps and opportunities for express and cross-town routes. Sometimes we've seen that PVTA riders are sometimes, because the system is this hub and spoke, people are going into the center of town only to transfer to another route to take them to a neighboring community that was just very short distance away on a direct route. And so this is providing us with information to plan more of these crosstown routes. We're using it to identify service disparities across different neighborhoods. And all of this PVTA is using to reduce travel times for our riders, to extend routes, to eliminate transfers where necessary, and to provide new direct routes between OD pairs that we are seeing have high transfer volumes. We're also using the data to coordinate transfers. With the ODX outputs, we're able to understand passenger transfer patterns, and we can then use it to coordinate route schedules and transfer timing and signage where we see high volume of transfers happening. We're using the data also for capacity management. We're using, for example, routes where we see a high share of riders being derived from transferring passengers. And we're using this to reallocate resources to optimize the service. And lastly, we're using the data for fare planning. PVTA was able to use this data to develop a fare capping impact model, which we have a TRR paper on. We're also considering eliminating transfer tickets and providing a 90-minute pass that would ensure that our riders are not paying extra to transfer between routes. Next slide, please. And all of this work was really possible with many players involved. We want to thank the FTA and particularly Justin John, who was our project manager on the AIM project, I want to thank the UMass Amherst team that worked on developing the ODX model and dashboard, Dr. Jamil Keh and Mohammed Abdelazim, and those within PVTA, Alex Forrest and Sandra, Sandra Sheehan, who's the administrator of PVTA, for her support in the work. And here I have provided my contact information if you have any extra questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tolu. Thank you so much, Dr. Verma, and thank you so much, Jim, for your presentations. Really fascinating things, how you're applying, collecting data to your actual implementation of your services. We thank you again for all the time and effort you put into those presentations, and thank you again for this session. We are going to go on a 15-minute break, and we will return at 2:15 p.m. Eastern or 11:15 Pacific.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Depending on where you are, maybe it's good morning. So thanks for joining us today for the 2023 Research to Practice Transit Symposium. Our section right now is the bus stop spacing. So my name is Jacob Yan. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Florida, focusing on transportation engineering, specifically data science and AI applications on public transit and sustainable transportation. So for this bus stop spacing topic, we have 3 speakers joining us today to present their work. All 3 of them come from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. They are 3 PhD students who have been doing very interesting work on this space. So each of them will first present their work, and then we will have some time in the end to I will ask some questions, and feel free to ask questions from the audience as well. So with that, let's start with the first presentation. Our speaker is Pranith Devanuri. Pranith is an interdisciplinary researcher applying data science, natural language processing, and economics principles to the transit and ride-sharing disciplines. He obtained his Bachelor of Technology from IIT Madras and Master of Science from Texas A&M University. Pranith is currently pursuing his doctoral degree from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He is enthusiastic about transit data accessibility and is working on the applications of large language models to this domain as part of his dissertation. His research has been recognized and published in many esteemed journals, such as Transportation Research Part A, Research in Transportation Economics, and Expert Systems with Applications. He presented his work at notable conferences such as TRB, the European Conference on Computer Vision, and Illinois Transportation Highway Engineering Conference. With that, please have the floor, Pranith, and start your presentation. You have the floor now. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor, for the wonderful introduction. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So myself, I'm Praneeth. I'm a 4th-year PhD student. Along with me, we have Ayush here, who is also a 4th-year PhD student, and Shireen is a 3rd-year PhD student now. We are advised by Professor Lewis Lee, and we are from the UTEL lab that focuses on urban traffic and economics. And today we are going to be presenting on bus stop spacings. Here's the outline for today's presentation. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the stop spacing theory and how to obtain stop spacings using GTFS data. And then Shireen will be talking a little bit about what factors influence the stop spacings. And Ayush will later present his work on heterogeneous trip length and stop spacings. And after that, we'll be discussing a little bit about the future work that our group is doing. Let me start off by giving a little bit of introduction about the stop spacings and the theory behind that. So a stop spacing is the distance between two consecutive stops along a bus route. It's a common thing around the discussions of accessibility, stop consolidation, and things regarding operational efficiency of buses. When it comes to discussion of stop spacings, the term average stop spacing or average is used around in discussions of transit design plans, stop design guidelines, and stop consolidation practices. However, the term average is somewhat ambiguous. To see why, let's take this example. For a single route, it's pretty much evident that the average stop spacing is simply the mean of all the segments. However, for a network, it's slightly more complex than for what is for a single route. It depends on what kind of weighting we choose, and each weighting would lead to a different average stop spacing. The first one that we came up was a segment weighted spacing in which each segment in the network receives an equal weight. This is an average spacing that someone would face who is at a given stop and trying to reach a next stop. The next one is the route weighted spacing, where each segment is weighted by the number of routes that it is included on. To imagine this, imagine a bus that is traversing across all of these routes one time. But we know that in a transit schedule, typically each route is visited more than one time by the number of buses and the traversals on it. So if we weight by the number of traversals on each segment, we get the traversal weighted spacing. And if we also account for the number of passengers that are on these buses, we get the passenger weighted, where the segments are weighted by the average load or passengers on the bus. To see how these different spacings play out, we came up with a hypothetical network to illustrate these different spacings. Here in this network, which is a very simple illustration, we have two routes, blue and green, with blue having twice as many buses per day than green, and following that stop sequence. If we were to construct the weightings for these and get the average stop spacing, we would notice that the average stop spacings for each different weighting system are widely different, ranging from the segment weighted being 375 to the passenger weighting being 225, which are widely different. So even with a very simple example like this, we were able to show that the averages might not mean anything unless you are talking about what the weightings are. So we were interested to see how these spacings exist for actual real world cities. But we stumbled upon how do we obtain the stop spacings for these. If you were to look by simply Googling what is the average stop spacing in the United States, you would get the following result, which says about a quarter of a mile or less, which is about 400 to 500 meters. But this is just an anecdotal evidence, and it's not based out of any data. So there's also ambiguity in the way that what they mean by the average, and there's also lack of standardization. For example, if you were to search the same thing for Chicago, you would get the result like it's 1 or 2 blocks apart. But what is a block? How far is a block? What is the distance of a block? All these are probably unknown. And there are also things like people report it in yards, feet, meters, kilometers, and all that stuff. And besides that, we were thinking why not use GTFS to get the most current stop spacings? But the GTFS is also subject to changes frequently. For example, RTD in Denver changes about once or twice a week their feed. Since there existed no packages out there, we went up and created our own Python package called GTFS segments that is used to calculate the stop spacings. This is built on top of existing libraries like pandas, geopandas, scikit-learn, etc., and uses the mobility database to obtain the current fields. To give an overview of the GTFS segments package and its inner workings, it takes the raw GTFS zip file and then filters the busiest day, which is used to compare different agencies or the agency with itself. And then the segments are obtained by splitting the root shapes into the segment shapes. And finally, you could export this to like formats like CSV or GeoJSON. Let me focus on this for one particular part, which is splitting the route shapes into segment shapes. That is a little bit challenging and also interesting. The GTFS gives out the shape files in the form of a line string, which is made up of the coordinates that represent the line string. The stops are given in a separate file, which have to be overlaid onto the shape itself. However, it so happens that most of the times, these stops are not aligned on top of the shapefile and are far away from it. So two common approaches to project or snap these stops are to match to the nearest coordinate or to project them onto the line itself. However, both of these approaches have challenges to them. Imagine a situation where the stop is equidistant from two of these legs here. So even a small change would mean that the snapping algorithm would favor one to the other. And particularly the difficulty increases with things like loops. To overcome this, what GTFS segments does is that it uses two approaches to tackle this problem. The first one is to increase the resolution of the GTFS data. So in this process, it adds up coordinates between the existing coordinates so that no two coordinates are more than 4 meters apart. And it also uses more than one nearest neighbors so that the stops are arranged in the correct order. Once the stops are arranged in the correct order, we obtain the segments by simply splitting up the road shapes into the segment shapes. After that, we obtain something like this, where each row represents a segment, and the geometry here is basically the line string that represents the segment. This format is in GeoPandas, and it can be exported to formats like GeoJSON and shapefiles, which can be used in softwares, any GIS softwares like ArcGIS, QGIS, or Mapbox. Once we have the segment, we can compute the summary statistics at the network and route level. At the network level, we can get the segment, route, and traversal weighted means. So these are the things I have explained previously in the theory. And for each particular route, you could also get the average stop spacing along with a bunch of different things from the package. We have made all the stop spacing data available for around 540 agencies in the US and around 80 agencies in Canada. And the GTFS package, GTFS segments package is also listed on the gtfs.org in the official documentation. I'm going to be quickly giving some overview of the features of this package and some example use cases. The first one is with the problem of how to even get the latest data. The mobility data has the most recent GTFS data available. So the package writes a wrapper around this using a place as the search. You can get the most recent GTFS data and obtain the segments for it. And once you get the segments, you can visualize these segments at different levels. Let's start out with visualizing at a network level, where you could highlight all of the network and the stops on the network, or visualize a particular route and the segments within it. So the figure here is for SFMTA network. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. And you could also visualize this network as a heat map where you have segments with more broader spacings represented in yellow. The ones that are around the average are represented in green, and the more narrower segments are represented in blue. You could also visualize these segments at a route level to have more granularity and also split these things into different directions. We could also visualize this at a segment level to see these segments in more detail. And this is particularly helpful to see if the segments make sense and if they are accurate enough. For example, in this particular scenario, this segment passes through the traffic circle and actually cuts it through. But probably if one were to do it in a correct way, the segment should go around the traffic circle. And besides viewing these segments in a network with a base map, you could also like view these segments as a histogram by getting the distribution of spacings. So here's an example again from SFMTA. And you can see that this particular distribution here is bimodal. So if someone were to like represent this transit network or model it, probably a unimodal approach might not be a right approach here. And without knowing the distribution of spacings, it's hard to gauge that. So there's also a different level of comparison of spacings that one can do. So here's an example of how the stop spacings within a particular agency could be tracked over a time. RTD in Denver led stop consolidation efforts from 2017 to 2022. As a result of that, you can see that the stop spacings have increased from Jan 2017 up until Jan 2020, which was when the COVID hit, and RTD ended up like removing some of its routes in suburban areas, due to which the stop spacings have, the average spacing has reduced. And then eventually with more consolidation efforts, they have reached their target of 400 meters. We've also done a study where we looked at the top 30 agencies in the US by the ridership. So on the top end, you have cities like San Francisco, Chicago, and Philadelphia, which have much narrower spacings, around 250 meters. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have agencies like Austin, Capital Metro in Austin, RTC in Las Vegas, and then the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority in San Jose, which have almost double the average spacing than what it is in SFMTA, for example. So this is particularly helpful to convince agencies around the discussion of stop consolidations. And one can also like compare the spacings of how at a nationwide level. We looked at the average spacings for the top 30 cities in US, top 10 in Canada, and a lot of European and Australian cities. We noticed that the stop spacings in the US and Canada are much narrower than what the conventional wisdom says, which is about like 400 to 500 meters. And not only that, they are much less than countries in Europe, such as like Poland or Polish cities, where the stop spacings almost reach 600 meters as well. Now, Shireen is going to be talking a little bit about what factors influence the stop spacings at an agency level and at a country level.
Thank you, Pranith. Pranith, I will quickly introduce Shireen in a second, but I want to ask a clarifying question. Because I have this question, and your presentation will be related. So it sounds like when we talk about bus stop spacing, for like everyday conversation, when we use the term, we usually think about the distance between two bus stops on the same route, right? And it sounds like you have applied a totally different definition. Can you explain a little bit more what's the main thinking behind your definition?
Yeah, that's a great question, Professor. So the main idea behind is that when different users are using the stop spacings or like perceiving the stop spacings, they do it differently. What someone who is like looking from an accessibility perspective and is trying to like look at what is the nearest stop and how far are the stops spaced apart would benefit from something like a segment weighted spacing. But if you're looking from an operational perspective of from like maybe a driver or like a transit system, then something like a route weighted or traversal weighted spacing would make sense. But if you're also looking from the perspective of what an average rider experiences, then that's something like what a passenger weighting would be. So that was kind of the motivation behind coming up with different weightings here, which is probably different from what conventionally people do, which is maybe just straight up average.
I see. I can understand your perspective, but when you use the term bus stop spacing, that makes like that contradicts our conventional definition and thinking of the term. And looks like Dr. Louis Leahy is trying to explain. Your definition is not different from what I said, but you account for the additional considerations of the individual traveler experience or from the operator's network perspective. I guess that's how I understand it. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. With that, let's move to the second presentation. So Shireen Qian, who will present the second talk. She is currently pursuing her PhD in at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She holds a bachelor degree in civil and environmental engineering from Isfahan University of Technology and a master's degree in transportation engineering from Sharif University of Technology. Her research focuses on transportation engineering with the current project using economics to study bus stop spacing and its connection to socioeconomic factors. So please have the floor and move forward with your presentation. Sharon.
Thank you, Professor. Pranis, can you close the Zoom? Thank you so much. Well, actually, Pranis talked about bus stop spacing theories, and consolidation practice is one result for that. But here, I want to see what factors influence stop spacing in existing US systems. Next slide, please. Next. Okay, as there is no data set that cover all of the information we want, we had to use different data sources, including GTFS for our bus stop data and American Community Survey, a smart location database, and US climate normals for our other characteristics that we want to explore. Basically, we have our data can be categorized into two parts. The first part is bus stop data, that is the bus segments across the whole US using GTFS segment package that Pernice showed you. And another part is our characteristic data that has the features for every block groups in the US. So to merge these two, we just use those block groups that have a stop on them. For example, in this figure, we have three block groups and one segment in blue line with stop A and B. So here we just consider the green block groups and we assign the blue segment to both of them. Also, to have a more robust analysis, we just consider top 100 agencies across the US based on the ridership data, and the whole process results in almost 49,000 block groups that have the spacing data and all other features. Next. As we want to see what are the factors that influence spacing, the first thing we can see is how is the distribution of spacing through different cities. For example, this is for Philadelphia SEPTA agency, and we can see that when we're moving toward the center, we have narrower spacings in dark color. Next slide, please. This is another example for Baltimore that is showing the same pattern. So let's see how spacing change when we approaching the center. Here we are using a regression model in which y is spacing, x is distance from center, and we also use a fixed effect for agency because we want to just see the impact of distance from center, not the specific features of the agencies. So as you can see in the figure, this is the gradient lines for different cities, and for all of them, when we become closer to center, the spacing is narrower. So as what we had for distance from center, we can explore the bivariate relationship between bus stop spacing and our other independent variables. Here, these figures show bin scatter plots for just some example variable. And we use a bin scatter plot here because our data set is too large, and a bin scatter plot can show the trend more clear. The first figure on the left is spacing versus distance from center that I talked about that, and we can see a linear relationship here. The second figure is spacing versus population density, and the figure shows an inverse relationship. And the last one on the right is spacing versus intersection density, and it also shows an inverse relationship. The values below the figures are indicating the Pearson and Spearman correlation values. And for example, for population density, we can see that Spearman value is much higher than Pearson. And it's saying that a nonlinear relationship can show a better fit here. So as it is common to use a log-log form instead of linear when we are working with socioeconomic characteristics, here we try to see how log of spacing is related to log of population density, and we can see that is a linear relationship here. However, we also performed a Box-Cox transformation in the paper and proved that using log of spacing is a better fit for all of our independent variables. Next slide, please. Okay, however, relying just on bivariate analysis is not correct because all of our independent variables are correlated to each other. Let's see an example. For example, we know that population density has some impact on spacing and road density. So when we want to see the impact of road density on spacing, if we just consider these two variables in a bivariate relationship, we miss this fact that some of those influences in the coefficient is because of population density, not road density. Next slide, please. That's the reason we need to control for some variables, and here we control for population density and distance from center because these two variables show the strongest correlation with bus stop spacing. In the table, The second column shows the coefficients that are not controlled with any variable. This is just a bivariate regression, and the last two columns show the coefficients when we control for population density and distance from center. As you can see, some of the coefficients will be changed when we control, and specifically for road density, when we control for population density, we can see that the sign of the coefficient is reversed. It's saying that if we just consider a bivariate relationship, we think that road density is negatively correlated to the bus stop spacing. But when we control for other variables, we realize that this relationship is positive. And the figure also shows these lines and slopes, adjusted lines actually. So to deal with this issue, we decide to use a multivariate analysis that consider all of the variables together. So here we regress log of spacing with our other independent variables. Some of them are in log form, some of them are linear. And we also use a fixed effect for agency because we just want to see the effect of these variables. In the first model, we didn't involve the demographic variable, which is a percentage of people older than 60. But in the second model, we cover all of our variables, and also there are 100 intercepts for each agency that is not shown in the table. And we can see that the second model improved the adjusted R-square a little. Next slide, please. Also, one another interesting aspect is to see what factors explain spacing at agency level, because everything we had until now was in block group level. So for that, we have two models here. In the first model, we regress those agency fixed effects with our temperature variables that are minimum temperature in January and maximum temperature in July. And the results show that minimum temperature in January has a positive significant influence on spacing, but maximum temperature in July doesn't have any significant relation with bus stop spacing. In our second model, instead of using those fixed effect intercepts, we just use an average of spacing for each agency and regress them by our temperature variables. The results are almost the same, but we can see that the coefficients are different. And that's because in here, we just consider an average, and we didn't isolate the agency's features. So maybe there are some other variables that have some impact in here. And as a conclusion, I want to summarize some key findings. Population density and distance from center show the most influence on bus stop spacing. And it's reasonable because they are some indicators of demand and trip length, and maybe that's the reason. Road density was negatively associated with bus stop spacing in a bivariate analysis, but when we consider all the variables together, this relationship turns to be positive. Based on our multivariate regression results, in this situation, we have narrower spacing, less distance to center, higher population density, lower road and intersection density, lower median income for each block group, and a higher number of households without car and elderly people. And at the agency level, agencies in cities with lower temperature tend to have narrower spacing, and that's maybe because walking in a cold weather is so hard. And yeah, thank you, Ayush. Now Ayush is going to explain his theoretical model about heterogeneous trip lengths and stop spacing.
Okay, thank you, Shireen. So
Thank you.
last speaker, Ayush Pandey, he is a PhD student in civil engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. His research interests lie in the intersection of transportation engineering, transport economics, and urban economics. So with that short introduction, please go ahead with your presentation.
Professor Yan. And so everyone now heard Pranith and Shireen talking about bus stop spacing statistics and how it relates to other variables. I'm going to talk about more of a theoretical model that tries to relate the relationship between trip lengths and stop spacing. So the key consideration in deciding the stop spacing, can I get to the next slide, please? So the key consideration in deciding the stop spacing for a route, especially when you look at it theoretically, is the trade-off between access time and in-vehicle time. So when you're outside the bus, you want a bus stop close to you so you can quickly walk to it. Once you get in the bus, you want bus stops very far away. So the bus doesn't stop that often. You don't lose a lot of time stopping, and the bus goes faster. So anytime you're trying to design stop spacing for a certain route, you seek to minimize the total travel time, which is going to be the sum of your access time, the time it takes for you to get to a bus stop, and your in-vehicle time. But whose total time is usually minimized? So what's done in most models is that some average trip length or some universal trip length is considered, and the total time for those trip lengths is minimized. And then the assumption baked in there is that the universal trip length or the average trip length doesn't really change if you change stop spacings. However, it is reasonable to expect that once you change system characteristics, especially characteristics like stop spacing, trip lengths are going to vary with that. So that is because, well, people choose to ride a bus or not, and average trip lengths, demand functions, and all are just a result of aggregate decisions people make. And these decisions depend on system characteristics, like how long will you have to wait for a bus, how far do you have to walk to get to a bus, and then once you're on the bus, how far is the bus moving on average. And if you change some large characteristics, like the headway of the system, and in this case, the stop spacing, all three of these characteristics change. So this is going to change who is now riding the bus, and it will change what they ride the bus for. So any system changes are going to change the trips people are making the buses on. For example, let's take Route 0 in Phoenix and Route 4 in Philadelphia and compare the two and what trips they might kind of encourage and serve. So the two routes have similar distances. In Phoenix, it's 13 kilometers. Philadelphia, this route is about 17 kilometers, but they have widely different average speeds. The Phoenix bus route has an average speed of 28 kilometers per hour. Philadelphia Route 4 is 16 kilometers per hour. Now, the speeds are widely different because it's different cities, but one of the reasons these speeds could be so different is that the spacing between stops is very, very different. In Phoenix, this spacing is 350 meters. In Philadelphia, it's 170 meters. So if you were on Route 4 Philadelphia, you would encounter twice as many bus stops for the same length if you were to do that on Phoenix Route 0. That would mean that even though you have shorter walking distance in Philadelphia, your in-vehicle time is much higher. And some part of it is contributed by the fact that your bus is going to stop again and again. So if you were making a very short trip, say of 2 kilometers, in Phoenix, you spend like about 4 minutes in the bus and about 4 minutes walking. In Philadelphia, you spend about 7 minutes in the bus, but only like 2 minutes walking. And for short trips, these times are comparable. But now if you wanted to make a much larger trip, say 6 kilometers, in Phoenix, you would spend, say, 13 minutes in the bus and 3 minutes, 4 minutes walking. In Philadelphia, your walking is very short, but you spend a lot more time in the bus. So what's happening here is that in Philadelphia Route 4, it's not really good for making long trips. And it's not just that it's not good for making long trips. It is going to encourage people to make shorter trips using the bus, and people might choose another mode to make long trips. And so that's the motivation for our study. And to that end, we build macroscopic continuous approximation models, which is a lot of work with simple theoretical models that focus on the fact that stop spacings can vary. People have different trip lengths, and then the demand is elastic for all of these trip lengths. So anytime a system characteristic changes, the demand for each trip length changes. And we model it for system with fixed headways. Like, so if you have a large agency, small system changes do not change your headways a lot. And then we also model it for systems with fixed fleet sizes. So your headways are endogenous. So if you are running a much more efficient system, you could have smaller headways. And I'll spare you all the math, but if people are interested, the preprint is available online and you could search it up, or you could write to us and be happy to talk to you. So the key finding from this is that, say you have a stop spacing of S0, which is very small. So the time you have to walk to access a bus stop is very small, but you're very slow. So for a longer trip, your travel times are high. Now, if you change your spacing to some S1, which is greater than S0, you're going to see an increase in your access time. You're going to have to walk farther to get to the bus stop, but your speeds are going to go up. So if you have a very long trip, it now takes less time compared to when the spacing was S0. That means that there's some critical trip length. And anytime you make a trip shorter than the critical trip length, this increase in stop spacing is bad for you. But if you're making long trips, this increase in stop spacing is going to decrease your total travel time. And so any trip longer than the critical trip length is favored by longer spacings. So increasing stop spacing as a result is inducing longer trips, and it starts repelling shorter trips. So that would mean if you increase the stop spacing in your average stop spacing in your system, the average trip length would also start changing with the stop spacing. And then as a side point, we also go ahead and prove that any stop spacing you have that maximizes your ridership, so that is, say, the number of people riding the bus per day, is always smaller than the stop spacing that would maximize your passenger kilometers traveled during that day. So these are both factors an agency could choose to maximize, but it is good to be aware of the trade-offs between the two. You cannot maximize both of them at the same time. Another effect it has is on stop consolidation when you have endogenous headways. So if you have, say, a small agency, you are not running a lot of buses, removing stops is going to mean that your buses can go much faster now. And if they go so much faster that your headways reduce by a lot, that the total access time is not increasing by that much, then travel time can reduce for everyone. So in this case, the trade-off is between your access time, which is the walking time, and the waiting time you'll have. So you reduce a few stops, your buses go faster, your headways fall. If the stops were too close to each other, the headways fall so much that your reduction in wait time is higher than the extra time you spend walking. And we can theoretically calculate what that threshold spacing comes out to be. It depends on the route length, the number of buses on the route, the time you lose on a stop, and then the speed people walk at. And so we took the data that Praneeth has from GTFS segments, and we calculated these thresholds for certain routes. So we assume that every time a bus stops at a stop, it loses 20 seconds, and then people walk with an average speed of about 3 kilometers an hour. And then for these 10 cities, we looked at every route and calculated the threshold for that route. And so in cities like Philadelphia, which have very low spacings, around 220 meters on average, about 85% of the routes have shorter spacing than the threshold. And then in cities like New York City that have been making changes to their transit system are on the other end, and only 12% of routes have a spacing smaller than the threshold. Now, these numbers are not concrete because, relating a theoretical model to real world practices is not that straightforward, but it is indicative that we could have some stop consolidation in some cities with very short routes. And then finally, in conclusion, just to recap, so we show theoretically that trip lengths are not independent of stop spacing. If you change your stop spacing, trip lengths are going to change. Increasing stop spacing is going to induce longer trips, and it is going to repel shorter trips. And even if you have more complicated models where the time lost on a stop depend on the number of people alighting and boarding, all of these results still hold. So these results are robust to those assumptions. And then if your stops are too narrow, stop consolidation can reduce travel time for everyone in the system, no matter how short your trip is. So that's my presentation. And I would just like to thank Professor Jacob, the organizers, and everyone attending. And there's some QR codes for our papers and our package. And if you have any questions, feel free.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your presentation, Ayush. I think that was very interesting, and you elaborated your ideas very clearly. For the audience, if you have any questions, please email chat writing at Caltrans all of you probably has his email right now. If you don't, you can go to the website where you register to find his email. So if given the time we have, we don't have the time to answer your questions, I can forward the emails to the speakers and they can address your questions. Looks like we are almost at time, but I find your work super interesting, and I do have a few questions. For before we go for the next section, we do have a little bit buffer time, so I will take advantage of that to ask make a comment also and ask a question.
Okay.
So it looks like we saw population density and roadway density from Shireen's presentation be associated with spacing, and when you control for population density, the association between roadway density and spacing is positive.
Yes.
But in that model, wouldn't the two be highly correlated, population and roadway density? So the model could be like the coefficient estimates can be unreliable because of the multi-collinear issue.
Actually, no. When we have multicollinearity, we can't necessarily say that they are not reliable. There are some tests that consider that, but having those together, all the variables together, prevents something called omitted variable bias that is so much more important issue. So yeah, I think when we have all the variables together and we see some variable like road density, which is significant, we can rely on coefficients, I think.
I see.
Yeah.
And another small technical detail, like you use the block group level data. A lot of the bus stops, they tend to be located on the boundary of block groups or census tracts. How did you deal with this question, this issue?
Actually, yeah, good question. Actually, we use the geometries that is reported for both block groups and bus stops. So we didn't have any like instance that the bus stop spacing was exactly on the boundaries. So we didn't face that. But I got your question, and you are saying, for example, it's a little on the block group. Yeah, we consider that for that segment for the block group.
Okay, got it. Yeah, previously, what people have also been doing is to do a robustness check. Like you can assign the bus stop either to the block group that captures it, or like also to the nearby bus stop, or do a half-half.
Yeah. That's a great point. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. So on the more larger picture, I think because a lot of the audience here today are like practitioners, they would definitely appreciate your technical work, but they would be probably more curious. Now you have told us the stop consolidation is probably a good idea. Do you see like any real life cases where the agency has done stop consolidation and lead to let's say either rise in ridership or improvement in operational efficiency or even improvement in passenger experience? Because I think a lot of agencies like I assume you all have read Jared Walker's book, The Trade-off Between Frequency and Coverage. Like stops are placed everywhere because they improve coverage, and Americans don't like to walk. So when you try to consolidate the bus stops, you will receive complaints. So how would you tell the agencies that are hesitating to do stop consolidation based on some real life case study or empirical evidence?
Well, so we don't have any empirical evidence for it right now. We are looking to get some data so we could maybe run some tests and show it empirically. But the idea behind writing this paper with heterogeneous trip length and stop spacing was actually to see the effects of stop consolidation on like not just bus speeds and reliability, but also how it changes who rides the bus. So what happens right now is you have a certain spacing, and when it's very narrow, people are probably using it for short trips. And people who have longer trips are never going to get on that bus system because it's very slow. So it's kind of trying to build a theoretical framework that allows and facilitates this debate between for and against stop consolidation. So we don't really take a side, but the goal for that was to kind of build a framework where people can bring that data, try to fit those functions, and be like, okay, for our agency, this makes sense. And then, okay, it might not make a lot of sense for this agency. So that was the goal behind the theoretical analysis.
Got it. It makes perfect sense. And like for your analysis, to me, you are looking at the individual traveler. Like when you like when you add more stops, the individual's travel lengths or tend to be decreased, or like their trip experience will like if they take longer trips, the travel time will increase. But a natural extension to your framework is to look at how the group, the other riders will be affected, their travel time be affected, right? So basically, when you add stops, you are sacrificing everybody already on board or will be on board, and then benefiting that several riders who can then walk less. So that equilibrium framework that I'm not sure how can you build that model, but I would imagine that that could be something you work on next.
That's a great advice. Thank you.
So final question. What's next? Like, how do you plan to like further your study and potentially translate your research into practice? Like, you already have a package that the community can use. That's fantastic. But on the like doing additional research and also translating your research into practice, what are the plans?
Maybe I could take this question. So currently, what we are exploring is the use of large language models and generative AI to improve the accessibility. So right now, even a lot of these packages that we build still necessitate like some understanding of the package, some understanding of what the GTFS is, and then like also experience with the programming and things like that, like Python, C++, or whatever programming languages these built on. So we were thinking like maybe natural language could like help us here for especially those with like limited or no coding experience. So we are trying to like integrate a lot of different packages using large language models and then creating a framework to like use NLP techniques to input natural language prompts and then like get relevant information, thereby like increasing accessibility.
Awesome. Cool. That's a very exciting direction, right? You right now, people who want to use your packages need to be very tech savvy, need to know programming, but with the large language models, you potentially open the door to all potential interested professionals. Okay. I've already taken advantage of 7 minutes beyond allocated time. I want to keep the conversation going, but we have to stop and look forward to your future work. I learned a lot today. Thank you very much for your presentations. With that, let's end the. Thank you. Let's end the section here. I will hand the floor back to chat writing. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Thank you, Shireen. Thank you, Pranesh, and thank you, Ayush. Really appreciate your time today. So we're going to go. We're going to go on an 8-minute break. We will be back at 3:15 p.m. Eastern or 12:15 p.m. Pacific.
Welcome everyone to the Research to Transit Symposium. This is a session on research to practice. This is a session on research in transit, advancing research at public transit agencies. We are raised here with 5 different transit agencies across the country who are going to speak to us about their research programs. Today we are featuring Avi Shavit from LA Metro, Anne Gienap from King County Metro, Michael Berman from Sound Transit, John Levin from Metro Transit Minneapolis, and Martha Cook from MBTA. So please give a virtual welcome to our panelists today, and we will go ahead and let each one of them give us a quick update on themselves and their research programs, and then we'll get started into a roundtable conversation.
This is intros, right? Hi,
Yes.
everyone. My name is Avi Shavi, and I'm a senior director at LA Metro. And I am the Office of Extraordinary Innovation, or now the Office of Strategic Innovation. And are we talking about our slides?
Yeah, just talk
At
to your
this point,
slide.
okay. What I'm here and interested in is I oversee a vertical about pilots in the agency and looking at how we test doing things in a new way and how we test doing new things. This is just an example on the slide of two projects that I'm working on, mobility wallets, in which we're giving low-income individuals basically a menu of options on a prepaid debit card to use $150 a month for a year. Another pilot that we're testing is we're basically paying people not to drive to park one of their household cars in the driveway in the city of Santa Monica. It's called Take the One Car Challenge. But in order to do these pilots, you see this column of partners. We need many partners, not only to provide the funding through various federal, state grants, but also we want to work with academics to embed them into our projects and process from the very beginning. And what we're finding is if we don't embed those academics in the very beginning, we can't set up a project to really be studied or really be evaluated to understand performance. So I'm here to kind of talk about how we link programs, partners, and performance together. And really that starts with thinking about how we work with academics and do research in a different way. And I'll pass it back to you, Michael.
Great, thanks. Let's move on to King County Metro. Ann.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Gienap, and I lead the research team at King County Metro, which is based in Seattle. So I've been in this role for not quite 2 years, and the research program is one of several programs within our agency that has a focus on data, on research, and on analysis. So, we have different parts of our agency that engage in sort of engineering type analyses, analyses that inform tools. So, for example, a tool that we use to determine census blocks and routes that serve higher priorities of or higher proportions of our priority populations. Obviously, lots of analyses to inform route planning and service planning, and work that is done by our kind of business intelligence team to look at performance, to create dashboards, et cetera. So where our team fits into that is that we contribute data about customer perspectives related to transit, related to services, related to mobility, related to new products, et cetera, and really support knowledge development. So what do we know about our external context, about the mobility needs within our county? We contribute to evaluations of services and programs, and particularly our focus is on outcome evaluation. So what is true or different because of some of our services and products for people, in places, et cetera, or within our own practices. And then we support impact studies. So these are often longer term research studies using RCTs, randomized controlled trials, or other kind of rigorous methods to determine how our technologies, our services, our programs are having impact at scale. And to do that, we broker external partnerships. So you can see some examples of our external partners, both locally and nationally. And another way that our team brings value, I think, to the organization is by really synthesizing data across multiple sources. And we've created this real hub, the research, evaluation, and the learning hub that makes all different kinds of data, research examples, and other resources, including lots of short syntheses of data from across our agency and beyond, to support the various efforts and initiatives within our agency. And then lastly, really, we focus on capacity building, on helping teams and leaders and staff across our agency to be able to use data and to kind of think in that synthetic way and ask really meaningful questions of data. For whom, why, under what circumstances are we making a difference?
Thanks so much for that. And let's now move over to Sound Transit. Michael.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everybody. I am Michael Berman. I'm the Deputy Director of Research and Innovation at Sound Transit. I've been in this role for about a year and a half, but I've been at Sound Transit for over 11 years in a variety of capacities, generally, though, focused on innovation and serving the passenger. Our group, the Research and Innovation Group, sits in the Passenger Experience Department within Sound Transit, and we have a team of 9 plus interns. Our job is really to understand what it is our passengers need, whether it's with something related to our current service or potential future needs, try to understand what those needs are, and then bring that into operations. So we use surveys, which we have a annual or semi-annual, kind of depending on how often we feel like we need to do it, a passenger experience survey. We're responsible for the origin destination survey that we do. And then we also have ad hoc surveys after service disruptions or openings, just to get a sense of how well we did, for example, managing a disruption. We have recently started doing a lot of user experience research, so really diving in to specifically how people interact with the tools that we provide, whether it's signs actually out in the system or digital tools or anything else. We have a rider panel that we can engage to answer specific questions. And then finally, we build innovation pilot projects to actually get technology in front of people and see how they respond and see if it improves either the passenger experience or operational efficiency. And if so, then we advocate to try to get the pilot projects converted into larger full-time kind of enterprise level projects. I'd say our largest challenge is trying to generate action from our research results. Sound Transit is young as far as transit agencies go. We've only been around less than 30 years, and our genesis is as a capital organization to first finance and then build light rail transit. Because of that being in our DNA, it's very hard for us sometimes as an agency to think about operations and think about the passenger experience. So I can collect all the data I want about what passengers want or need or don't want or don't need or don't appreciate, but trying to weave that into either our construction practices or our ongoing operations is a challenge. And that's, I think, where I'm hoping, to move the needle from where I sit in the agency. And I will pass it back to Michael for the next panelist.
Great, thanks. John.
Hello, my name is John Levin. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Metro Transit, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Been in this department about 9 years and with Metro Transit about 26 years. When I think of what transit research means in our organization, much of our work is actually centered around the very practical question of what information does staff need to do their work. And many times those questions are answered just with better data and reporting or data visualization, business intelligence type tools. So a lot of work that we do is around performance measures and support for operational reporting. And that work is centered within our research data and analysis group led by Rachel Dunca in strategic initiatives. But behind those simple answers of, what is happening are really the deeper questions of, well, why is this happening? Or ultimately, how can we actually improve what's happening? And so we really always try to ground our work in the question, what decision is the business going to make with the data, the information that we're providing? And this is really what then tends to drive a lot of the research questions that come to us. The research, I think, is very recognizable to folks. We are in competition with an ever-growing range of travel options. So how do we understand public perceptions around transit and preferences and what their preferences are? It's really critical to designing good service and providing good operations. So we're trying to answer those questions for our internal customers. Like many agencies, these perennial challenges of workforce hiring, retention, management, larger now than ever. And so we have placed some of our effort around this kind of workforce question in our work. And then really across many different aspects of our service, running safe and clean, reliable buses and trains is the core of what we do. And so a lot of our focus is also in those areas. In terms of the nature of our work, a lot of effort around data access, data integration, data quality, building data pipelines that really allow for repeatable analyses over time has been a central focus of ours. We definitely have tried to leverage partnerships, not only internally, but also externally, really to try to bring expertise into the organization from the local university and from national organizations to augment the expertise and to really build our capacity and our knowledge internally. And then finally, and I would say most critically, really building all of this around a professional data science and research staff, many of them with deep backgrounds in academic research methods and structures. And this has been a really important contributor to the success that we have. And I'm sure we'll get into that as we go on.
Thanks for that, John. And Martha.
Thank you. So I'm the Director of Strategic Research with the Office of Performance Management and Innovation. And we are actually a shared service between the Department of Transportation in Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, which means that we have a little bit more latitude to think multimodally about some of our questions. And the subset of our office that I'm in is the strategic research team, but we work really closely. And when we do research we work with members of our other verticals, which are data strategy and performance management. And so there's these three interlocking pieces of what is the data, how do we use it, where do we store it, how do we share and clean that, how do we measure what goodness is, and then strategic research sort of figures out how we want to make these definitions, where new data sources might come from, things like that, doing some exploratory research to sort of shift our framework and our perspective of how we think about the transportation landscape. And so we have sort of 4 focus areas. One is travel behavior and land use. That's definitely a big piece of the research that we do. Another is just trying to develop standardized methodologies that we can use across both agencies. So thinking about low income, how we collect income data, those sorts of questions, or thinking about how we define different geographies across the state or within the MBTA's core service area based on travel behavior patterns and land use patterns, things like that. We also, sounds like a lot of folks here also do this program evaluation. So when we have pilots, are they working? How do we figure out how to evaluate those? And then a newer piece of this is trying to think more specifically about how we share out the information that we're learning. We sort of operate as an in-house consultant a lot of times, which means we'll do interesting work and we will share it with the person who requested it. But we are trying to think about how to get this good information out to more of both our colleagues and the public as well. So a couple examples just from the first focus area here of recent project work. Our data strategy team has been working with the DOT's Office of Transportation Planning to build out what we're calling the Massachusetts Vehicle Census. So we have odometer readings from all registered cars in the state, and we have a lot of information that goes with that. So how do we look at statewide VMT patterns, and what might that tell us about transit service for the T or our regional transit authorities? We have recently started doing a rolling version of our system-wide passenger demographic survey. And so we've started looking into how does the sort of intersectional demographic pattern of a T traveler change at different times of the day now that we've added a lot more sort of off-peak service on some of our modes. We've started looking into some data around bike sharing. So how does the local blue bike system in the greater Boston area interact with the T? Sort of what are travel patterns around T stations? And then we have a couple of projects with external partners right now at UMass Amherst around multimodal travel patterns and costs associated with that, whether they're economic, environmental, social costs. So that's a brief smattering of the work that we do. And I'll hand it back to Michael.
Yeah, great. So that's a great introduction to 5 different research programs at 5 different transit agencies. And I'm sure that if other agencies were to present, they would also have their own slice. So sometimes sort of digging into how we're similar and how we're different. When I've taken the presentation is down now, so it's all just the grid of folks here. I'll start off by asking, like, how do we define research? And I think we're already hearing from each of you, like, what your purviews are, and maybe we can kind of hop around and talk about those. But then also, like, who gets to define it, like, within your organization? So why don't we start with Anne? You want to mention a little bit about, like, how research is defined within your organization?
Yeah, as I sort of alluded to, I think research is broadly defined and defined differently by virtue of the different disciplinary backgrounds of people who are working in different groups. So as I mentioned, research is spread across our organization. And so what research looks like and how it's defined typically relates to those different groups and their focus, whether that's more planning oriented, more technologically oriented, et cetera, or more performance oriented aspects of our organization's performance. So I think we're working that out right now. And again, being somewhat new to Metro, it's just been interesting to kind of observe that. And one of the things that we're really seeking to do is to kind of come up with a more of a shared understanding of what does research mean. And I think the other speakers really hit on the variety of purposes for research, to understand travel behavior, to evaluate new and innovative mobility solutions, to support, policy, land use policy, et cetera. So there's a variety of different questions and purposes. And I think one of the things that we're doing is trying to kind of also expand that to encompass more of the knowledge, filling knowledge gaps. What do we know? What do we not know? And learning, using data to really make kind of informed decisions in real time, to course correct, to understand where pivots might be needed in some of our work.
Cool. And what about Michael Berman? It sounds like your research is mostly focused on customer experience and sort of the softer side of the research agenda.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's only been a quote unquote formal research program at Sound Transit for a little over 3 years. We were formed when the Passenger Experience Department was formed early in COVID. And because of our placement in the Passenger Experience Department, kind of by definition, most of the research we do focuses on that. We do work a lot with a team in operations that's our essential data team, and they're responsible for our internal metrics, tracking how we're performing, and they also do the ridership reporting that we have to submit as part of our NTD reporting. And we kind of have an ongoing slow motion effort, I would say, to try to marry up how we view ourselves internally versus how our passengers view us on some different metrics. But it's challenging because the dimensions of what we look at aren't the same. Even within our 3 different modes, we have 3 different definitions for on-time performance, for example, as I'm sure all of you are aware. And our passengers don't care about any of those definitions of on-time performance. They care about whether their bus or train was there for them when they wanted it. And we don't capture that kind of thing. So it's challenging. We are just starting on a process or project, I don't know what you want to call it, to establish levels of service across a number of dimensions of the passenger experience. And that will require a lot more close collaboration between passenger experience and operations, I would say, but that's very much in its infancy right now.
Okay. And so it sounds like maybe John, Metro Transit maybe has a different definition of research than what we've maybe heard so far. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you define research within your organization?
I mean, I think the key for us, and I mentioned in the introduction, is we really have just focused on, what are some of those core questions that people are coming to us with, trying to understand what's going on. And sometimes, it's almost like a continuum, and sometimes you dig deeper and deeper. What's going on here? What's the business process? What data do we have? And you really get to the bottom of it, like there's a fundamental question here that people want an answer to, that we can answer. And having and we'll get into this some more, but having the data and the staff available to actually be able to answer that type of question is kind of what's unique in terms of how we built it. So we've really come at this idea of having a research program sort of in a very organic way of, having the staff who have a research background, having data available, and then having these core research, these questions that are really research questions that are coming at us. And in so answering those questions and digging deeper into that, really we found ourselves being, a research group, as an addition to being sort of a performance, measures group and kind of a data management group.
Right. And Martha, you mentioned that you are shared services between the transit agency and the DOT. Like, does that have any impact on how you define research? And like, are there overlaps, or is it, any insights that you can share with us about being, having the DOT as part of your customer group?
Yeah, I'd say research is spread across both the T and the DOT we are in many ways the holders of data and data strategy and helping you figure out what is a good performance metric. But we have different teams on the T side who do focus groups and think about user experience. We have folks over there who work on process improvement in sort of like the maintenance yards and facilities like that. And then on the DOT side, we have sort of the long range plans and figuring out what is the research you have to do that feeds into those. And I think we're a little bit involved in most of those processes, and it ends up being collaborative, in which someone will come to us and say, this is what we're interested in the long range plan, but how do we measure that? Like what is a good denominator to use when we are talking about a goal for sidewalks in the Commonwealth? Like how many sidewalks do we want? Where should they be? Is it on literally every road? Is it the same for bike lanes? And so trying to help people answer those like very sort of precise and sort of small questions that are important and that plug into sort of the bigger research processes they might be doing.
Great. And Avi, how about you in LA Metro? How do you define research and who gets to define it?
Yeah, I think, LA Metro is a really large transportation authority because LA County is, 10 million. So we have research that's going on in many different departments, right? In our operations department, we do a annual on bus and on train survey of our customers to understand customer experience, right? And that's within our operations group, or we have actually a department of customer experience, and that's definitely research. And we have a lot of, researching what our customer needs and wants over, and trying to benchmark that. The research, I think that my department in terms of innovation does, I'm really interested in going a little bit beyond the research that we've done internally. I myself as a planner do a lot of research, right? When I'm trying to say, how should we do a new microtransit service, right? And how should we test the idea of on-demand service, which is actually a project that came through our department is now, we had some federal grants where we worked with King County Metro on, and now is actually a full-blown program called Metro Micro. So oftentimes when we want to do research, we want to ask a question, we actually test and iterate it. That's the best way to know. Sometimes you can do a lot of research in, say, what's global practice around the world. Sometimes we do it, but I'm also really interested to stretch our definitions of research within transportation, within planners, kind of understanding is, Southern California has a wealth of research institutes and scholars, right? Just in our backyard. UCLA, USC, Cal Berkeley, UCI, UC Davis. I'm going to forget some, so sorry. Stanford, right? There's so many of them. And they're trying to answer similar questions about equity and access to mobility and mobility and access, best return on investment for public funds. And so I've recently, in some of the pilot projects I've been doing, I've been trying to cobble together grant funds to fund researchers at the same time as funding new projects or extending new existing pilot projects, to actually embed researchers from those existing academic universities into our project team. And I actually learn a lot as a project. It's almost like I'm going back to school to get maybe I should go get a PhD, but I have learned a lot. I've been working with, somebody said, don't go to get a PhD. I've been working with actually the University of Duke. They have a Center for Advanced Hindsight, and they've taught me all about behavioral economics, right? And embedded behavioral economics into a space in transportation that we never really were using that kind of thought process or research method. Been working a lot with UCLA and UC Davis. Shout out to them for this mobility wallet, thinking a lot about how we see subsidies and basically giving people funds to buy transportation that are very low income, and what does that impact on economic health outcomes and prosperity. So I think bringing how do we bring the best and brightest ideas and maybe resources on research. I think as a public agency, we're always strapped for resources and expertise in-house. Oftentimes, right, our first inclination is to contract with, and there's a long litany, so I'm not a list of planning consultants, and I like a lot of them, so I'm not going to even try to start listing them. and they have great ideas on how to do research practice, but they're not trained academic researchers. And oftentimes it's more of, I would say, you know, they're like adding additional, they're adding additional jobs, right? And hands and boots on the ground to do the work, versus are they adding really additional research expertise? So anyways, one of the challenges I think that I'm interested in conversing with the folks here and nationwide is, how do we do that in a better way? Because recently there's definitely a struggle to like bring the best and brightest ideas of research and to embed them. We're particularly, if you think about all the public universities, right, that are funded by taxpayer dollars, and all of our public organizations that are funded by taxpayer dollars, shouldn't we be working more hand in hand together? So I'm very interested in that, because I think that's an untapped resource that, you know, ivory tower shouldn't just sit here, and transit agencies and city agencies shouldn't just sit here. We should figure out how to kind of meld our work together.
That's a great transition to another topic that I wanted to talk about kind of as a group here, about, you know, working with research partners, whether it's academic institutions or consultants, or having an internal team, or using benchmarking or other sorts of organizations. I'd love to hear each of you sort of address like what your primary research channels are, and sort of what the pluses and minuses are of how you do it. I know, you know, we for a long time here, sorry, I never introduced myself. My name is Michael Eichler. I work at WMATA in DC. I'm the vice chair of the Transit Data Committee at TRB, and I'm very excited about being here. So anyway, so to that point, like working with academic institutions, and I know that we had for a long time done small little studies with individual research programs at different schools, and there's a lot of ramp up, and there's not a lot of payoff, and so we ended up moving to a funded research partnership, and that seems to be working maybe a little bit better. But you know, just curious to hear what other people's experiences have been in working with academics or other research channels. Let me start with John. You mentioned on your slide you had University of Minnesota right up on there. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your research channels and how you work with academics?
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, University of Minnesota, a major and one of the largest you know, research institutions in the country, just down the street from us. And I would say when I started here, you know, a couple decades ago, there was a few research programs around, especially around propulsion, vehicle propulsion, but really no formal relationship, and nothing that really allowed for kind of ongoing research. Every project was a new contract, and they would take months and months and months. They just didn't happen. So one of the things that we actually did early in the establishment of our department was to create a master research agreement with the university. There's no funding with that research agreement, but what it does is it creates a structure. It creates all the contract language for research projects. It creates a work order contracting project that's much more streamlined. You know, we can get it done in a matter of weeks if we have a scope of work ready to go. And it kind of takes care of all those details for us. And so we've really sped up the process. We've done projects related to fare evasion and fare program analysis, customer experience, analysis of ridership patterns. Wherever there's kind of that happy medium between the research questions we have and the research interests of the faculty, and I'll come back to that. So that's really been a really important factor for us in terms of allowing us to really more quickly and more easily conduct genuine research with the university.
Sorry, John, did you say that was a funded or unfunded research?
It's unfunded in the sense that it's not like we have a big research budget sitting there that is dedicated to the university. We have a contractual mechanism so that when we do have a project and we have funding from somewhere in the organization for it, we're able to more quickly get that research contract underway and get the research moving. So we'll fund each project individually from various sources. And so it's a good way to do it when you don't have that dedicated internal research program and research funding, but you do have an institution available to do research with. So that's been a really helpful thing. Now I will say, good research, as I mentioned, requires good data. And so, internally, what we've had to do is to make sure that we have, staff who have the interest and the ability to pull the data that's needed for research. Very often, the operations staff that actually manages the systems in which data that's needed for research lie, don't have the time. It's not a priority. So oftentimes don't have the skills to really pull the data in a way that's needed for the research. And so one of the benefits, again, of our group has been to have that data staff. So even if we're not doing the research ourselves internally, we have the staff here who can, figure out what data is really needed, query that data from the systems, package it up, create metadata around it so that the researchers are going to use the data correctly and effectively, and then provide that data. How do you get, a 10 gigabyte file to the university? Okay, we'll figure that out. And so that's been a really important part of how our group has supported that research, so the internal side. I would say that the challenge from the external side has really been the timeline of academic research is often very different than the timeline of institutional research needs. We need to know something in the next few months. The research proposal is a year long, because that's how long good research takes. And so really kind of finding projects where staff internally can be in it for the long haul has been important. But I think we've managed to identify those projects. And then, as I mentioned, it is really, it's important and not always obvious, to have researchers at the university who have research interests around the sort of topics that are of most importance to us. Genuine interest in transit operations research, those faculty are few and far between nationally. And so, there are some faculty at the university who have those interests, but I will say that we've sometimes have limited or kind of guided the research that we've conducted to really fit the research interests and capacity of the university. So that's an important piece of that whole relationship as well. But I'll just say, kind of just taking a step back from it, that relationship, with the university, the master research agreement has been very successful in terms of helping us to use that external research of the university.
Can you share that agreement with us?
Absolutely happy to.
Wonderful. Michael, you said in the chat you may have some insights about your University of Washington relationship.
Yeah, so we work with University of Washington in a couple of different ways. And I believe that it started originally because the UW as a school had better access to our ORCA smart card payment data than we as agencies had, I believe primarily for reasons of public disclosure. So they have built up a very strong infrastructure to store and analyze all of the tap on, tap off data that we get from our ORCA system. And that's really been invaluable for a lot of analyses that we do. The contract we have with them, though, allows us really to tap into anything we want in the university. So one thing we're exploring right now is, as we are on the verge of fielding our next origin destination survey, actually trying to find a statistician within the UW system who can help us validate our consultant sampling plan, because there's literally nobody in Sound Transit who will be able to make sense and tell if the consultant sampling plan makes sense or not. So we need to rely on external resources for that. At the same time, I'd say we do most of our partnerships, if you want to call them that, through consultants and vendors who provide services for us, whether it's our passenger experience survey or our rider panel or user experience research or a whole host of things. So we have people on staff who manage those contracts, in some cases do their own original research, but a lot of it is outsourced to other contractors just because it's easier to hire contractors and consultants than it is to hire staff with all of the needed expertise.
Yeah, I live that. And Martha, you had some comments about working with UMass.
Yeah, we haven't, in my brief time at the T/DOT, we haven't done a ton of academic partnerships. We do a lot of our own research, in part, as was mentioned, in-house because of the quick timelines and the quick turnarounds needed. But we have in the last couple of years found the FHWA's State Planning and Research Grant Program has been really wonderful resource for us. There's the #1 program, which is more for studies, and then the #2 program for applied research has been a great way to sort of sort of improve and accelerate the types of methods we use in our own research. So sort of testing out pilots right now. We have one looking at collecting data and developing a methodology to collect data so we can better understand the interactions between bus stops and people with disabilities or vision, sort of limited vision, how they access to that bus stop when it's immediately adjacent to a bike lane. So thinking about how are people behaving right now in cases where you have different designs of a bus stop next to a bike lane? How do you measure that? It's a combination right now of camera, LiDAR data, sort of measuring geometries. The T doesn't actually own or maintain our bus stops. They're built by municipalities. So there's sort of a gap there between how much knowledge we might have and retain. And so that project already has been incredibly useful in just developing methodology so we can do it on our own later, but also sort of some preliminary information around how we might want to shape our design guidelines there. So it's been a great program.
And you said that was a federal state planning and research grant program?
Yeah, and I believe the funds come through state DOT's offices of transportation planning, the folks who tend to hold the purse strings. And I know they over there have a sort of like a research and technology transfer team who has helped us figure out sort of like what's the paperwork we need to have, how do we create an application that sort of meets all the rules and make sure that it's really applied research. I think in the past, a lot of the work that's been funded through there has been like materials science, like how do you design a better asphalt for a bus pad? And so we're very excited to be thinking about this more from a customer rider perspective too.
Yep. Great, and Ed, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to what other, what you've all shared, which is really interesting. Two other things. So King County Metro has utilized some approaches for finding research partners through a couple of like what I would call matchmaking experiences. One is called Research for Impact, which is based out of the Johns Hopkins University, actually. And so when we are searching for a research partner, as we have done for a couple of initiatives, one is a fully subsidized annual pass for people with very low or no incomes that we are hoping to scale up and perhaps include as part of a state benefits package. So similar to, income supports and health benefits for people with low incomes, a transit benefit. So we used a matchmaking service, and I'm not sure if this was Research for Impact, to help find a research partner who shared that interest. And actually the research partner in that case is the Lab for Economic Opportunities at Notre Dame University, and King County has worked with Leo on a couple of other projects. So, but that matchmaking has been interesting. And then JPAL, the Poverty Action Lab, they have a couple of different programs, including the State and Local Evaluation Incubator Program, which is, it's an application process. You can apply for a small grant to kind of help flesh out a research idea. And then JPAL will, again, help to kind of make a match between that idea, that innovation, that program, and a research partner. And we have just actually engaged in that pathway to find a research partner to help us do an impact study of a new paratransit on-demand program. So sort of similar to flexible services. This is a paratransit service that functions like that, like a TNC, as opposed to what is now the case where you have to book a paratransit ride a day in advance. So anyway, just those matchmaking services, and through the JPAL matchmaking, we've also been able then to identify other grant opportunities to help support some of that research work.
Thanks for that. And Avi, you kicked this whole thing off with mentioning a variety of academic research organizations within California. Do you have any kind of closing remarks before we move on to another topic?
In the past, we have, kind of piggybacked on the federal UTCs, so the University Transportation Centers. And in the past, we've had contracts with Metrans, which includes a lot of those, public and private, Southern California and West Coast universities, which makes sense to work with, academic institutions that are in your backyard that are interested in and have, you know, the matchmaking kind of is already a little bit done because you're interested in the same kind of urban challenge and urban questions. So I think we in the past done that for a bunch of different reasons. We're no longer continuing that kind of contract, but I think we're interested in like maybe because sometimes it is useful to work with even though they're not in your backyard, an East Coast university because they have certain expertise. Or there have been like open loop payment in New York, and now we're going to test it, and we, you know, don't have yet open loop provider in California. It's coming soon, I think, in the Bay Area. So on our payment system. So, you know, in some cases there's a unique opportunity to work with, you know, not a geographically defined university or academic institution. So I think I'm interested and to look at like how we might not reinvent the wheel in our own contract, but maybe piggyback off of, you know, the federal already defined kind of bench. I'm looking into that, stay tuned. But, you know, it's worked well with our Metrans contract in the past, and maybe we'll pursue that in the future because it is, you know, as John, you expressed, like having some contract, we've tried doing these one-offs, and when we get a new grant from the feds or the state or local, and then trying to enter into agreement with a research university, and because of IP regulations, because of funding restrictions of who can use what funding source, it really is onerous to try to do it. And I think, you know, a note to the state and the feds, I think there is an interest with these competitive grants to partner with a university or academic institution to be more competitive for some of these for like research or pilot grants. And I think that model only works if there's already a contractual structure in place to work with them. I think trying to do it after you get the grant is really onerous and oftentimes will not work. And I've literally had universities that are working free for us in kind, which I don't think is a good long-term strategy or sustainable.
Great. Yeah. Great. Thanks for that. There's a lot of different perspectives on working with academics. So we have, I think, 15 minutes left, and you know, I have like 7 questions that I was hoping that we could try to 7 questions and 5 people is like there's no way that we can really get through all of those. So let's like kind of focus in towards the real reason why we're here, which is the research to practice topic, right? So we have these research programs, and we're using different strategies. We've got staff, we've got academic institutions, maybe we're hiring consultants to like answer some of these tough questions for us. But once we get the answer from the research, like how do we actually turn it into something? And I think Michael Berman, you had mentioned earlier that this is like one of your biggest challenges. Do you want to just like double click on that a little bit for us to get us started?
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. Let me talk about where it's working first, and then I can talk about what the challenges are. So we have different types of research, and this may sound obvious, but when people who are in the operational side of the house request research, then they're way more likely to use the results. So we have a rider panel that is comprised of about 300 to 400 of our passengers who've responded. When they respond to our annual survey, they say they want to participate in this panel, and then they do. We make that available to anyone in the agency who wants to ask riders questions. So we've used it to get information about perceptions of safety and security. Back early in COVID, we used it for people's plans to return to work. We've used it for various kinds of signage and wayfinding and digital tools. And because the people who are requesting the research want to know what our riders think, they are very likely to actually use the results. So that's terrific. And I'm really happy when that happens. Kind of at the other extreme, I would say, is our passenger experience survey. So we do that, and it gives us a baseline of what our passengers are experiencing across a wide range of what we call our foundational categories of passenger experience, so things like cleanliness, safety, reliability, and so forth. In the past, the questions were very general. So even if I found out, say that, you know, last year we were at a B+ in safety, and this year we're at a C+, it didn't give me the type of information that I could take to our safety and security department and say, here's where you need to change to because of the passengers' changed perceptions. So right now, actually, and anyone listening in the Seattle area, feel free to take our survey. Our revised passenger experience survey is out in the field, and we have really reworked it so that we're trying to get actionable information out of it, so that when all is said and done, I'll be able to look at the results and take them to, the safety department or the vertical transportation department or whomever, and pinpoint just where our passengers feel like we're falling down on the job, whether it's a specific geographic location or if it's a temporal thing or so forth. And I'm really hopeful that we'll see a change. And at the same time, this has been accompanied by an organizational change in our organization, where our previous chief passenger experience officer was recently promoted to head up both the passenger experience group and the operations department. So I know that there's some interest in talking about building executive support. I have executive support now at the kind of, if not the highest level of the organization, the second highest level of the organization, to help drive these changes throughout. So I'm hoping that these two things in concert will make a difference. And if I'm on this panel next year, I'll be able to tell you if it did.
Yeah, great. So we are running a little low on time, so I want to try to get our subsequent answers to be a little punchier. Avi, could you speak briefly about like the pilots that you're doing, and like, do you need buy-in to get the pilots off the ground? And if you had a pilot that didn't actually happen because you didn't have the buy-in in order to try to figure out if some new program was going to work?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do a lot is just like try it, right? If you have some research, and I'm a big proponent of like, let's just test this. Let's test it with 100 people. Let's test it with 200 people. Let's cobble together a little bit of funding and let's test it at a really small scale. But let's bring in some researchers at the beginning of it, the front end, and let them help design it so that it is, it has. You're getting enough data from that small test that it's statistically significant. And then later on, we can come back and say, hey, we tried this with 200 people. This was valuable. We set it up to be as close to a randomized control trial as we could. And now we can kind of span it. But we definitely, I think our department has, is a basically facilitator across our agency. And there has to be like a sponsor, right? There has to be someone in another department who wants to do the work. And I do a lot of like bridge building within my agency. I love working for Metro. And so that kind of helps, I think, because I've worked in multiple departments and I want to see the agency succeed as a whole. I want to see other project managers, directors, executives succeed in their work. And I want to see our customers have a good experience. So I think those kind of things they're not, can't be tangible, but they're qualitative things that like you just kind of bring everybody together. But a lot of education, a lot of like explaining, lots of fun decks with lots of pictures to explain the story, right? Tell the story, and the narrative is important, I think, if you want to try something new.
Yeah, and I saw you nodding your head a lot when the word sponsor came up. Can you speak a little bit to like executive buy-in and how do you get things done?
Yeah, no, I think that's really right. And, certainly when people ask for it, I think, Michael, your point is good. When people ask for data, that makes it more likely that, data findings will be put into practice. We spend a lot of time on this capacity building. I mentioned this earlier. This is a big part of our role. And Avi, I was also nodding my head when you talked about bridge building. I think that's a really big part of our work. So kind of finding sponsors, helping to build the capacity so that teams, executive leaders are able to draw meaning from the data, they're able to understand the story. So not just review findings. We're all really used to looking at dashboards, and like culturally, that is, I think a really strong part of our DNA. Let's look at the data. But beyond that, what are these data telling us? Where are they kind of pointing us directionally? And so trying to think more strategically instead of just tactically or operationally. And I think having a sponsor can really help with that, like just having sort of a point of contact for maybe kind of helping to articulate the questions that we're really trying to answer via these data, and make some of those questions practice questions, right? Like what's the decision? What are the opportunities to take action? Where can we course correct? So I think both of those things, the sponsorship and then the capacity building kind of work together to hopefully maximize the likelihood of data finding their way into practice.
Martha, what about up in Boston? What are you guys doing up there to make sure that the research findings get implemented?
Yeah, I just presented to our board yesterday on a big project we did. They closed a highway artery that goes across Boston Harbor from East Boston into downtown for restoration this summer, and they will also be doing it next summer. So this was a rare case where we had a major multimodal transportation project with a lot of knock-on effects around the North Shore, and sort of we'll also have that again next year. So like what mitigation efforts helped? We reduced the fares on one of the commuter rail lines in the impacted area. We had one of the sort of like the most affected subway line was fare free. We had a lot of free or reduced price parking along both of that commuter rail and the blue line. And then when we looked at the data, we saw it didn't, I mean, you guys may not be surprised by this, but the fare free thing was not the biggest driver of ridership. The line that was not fare free saw higher growth than the line that was. In part because traffic was just really bad around there because it had sort of this overflow of sort of traffic congestion. And we also, especially those of you who work with the UCLA folks, free parking didn't necessarily drive transit ridership. It just meant that people like all went to the sand sculpting festival that happened at a beach near the parking lot, near the train station in late July. And so putting together all those different data sources, which really came from like an external ferry team, the highway department, corroborating that with INRIX data, looking at sort of all these data sources, tying it together and really trying to pull out the key takeaways to then share with the people who are in charge of doing this next year. And I will say that one of the things we think is the communications were really strong. Like the T worked with the highways team to have those variable messaging signs that would say on the highway, like the next train is coming within 5 minutes of here in 10 minutes. Like you can pull off now and get on the train. And so it was cool to see sort of the results of all the effort that went into that this summer and our operational improvement, and to be able to make some suggestions for what the strongest sort of solutions might be for the shutdown next summer.
So it sounds like you had it was like the perfect storm of needing data and having data and being able to like make recommendations for next summer based off of it. That's awesome. It's not that often that happens, and what it does, it feels really good.
Yeah, and a lot of work from a lot of people to get that data clean and usable. I will say that. Big team effort.
Yeah, great. And John, what about you? Research to practice, executive buy-in.
Yeah, I think, when you say practice, research to practice to me means doing something operationally different, right? And so to do that, you need to really understand the business processes that are involved. What are the systems that are being used? What are the decisions that are being made? And so where we really have had successful kind of research into practice has been research that's been built around the business partners' work, their process, their questions. A great example of that is work we did around, we've done a lot of work around equity metrics. How do you actually measure equity? One of the areas of research and analysis has been shelter equity metrics, and where do we place our shelters and what does that mean from an equity perspective? And we designed that work to explicitly inform the decision-making process in collaboration with the folks who are deciding where shelters are going to go. And it really resulted then in a genuine change in the process, in a genuine change in the outcomes. So that's kind of a successful example. On the other hand, we've had examples where we've done research that I think have been really, really interesting and cutting edge, and research results that really point in an operational direction. But if the operations units really aren't engaged and interested and able to kind of apply that to their work, it doesn't go anywhere. And I think part of that also is just being patient. We did 6-7 years ago, we started research around absence modeling for bus operators, and then extra board optimization and overtime optimization, like how do you assign work? That research is still ongoing. It is built around tools. The pandemic has really put a damper into the, slowed us down, but it's still going on. I think it's still something we're really interested in. So oftentimes research into practice takes a lot of time because just overcoming that institutional inertia around the practice, the operations, can be difficult sometimes. But that's just been our observation, is when you have that real genuine partnership with the operations units and the work that they're doing, that's when you really see the most successful research into practice activities.
Yeah, and it's, from what I'm hearing, kind of synthesizing, I'm hearing like if you can work on things that they already care about, then work on those, and they'll happen, like getting stakeholders bought in early, getting executive sponsors, doing work on meaningful things, big picture things that have an audience. Sounds like there's a variety of strategies. So we're going to do real quick, like a lightning round, where I'm basically going to call on each one of you and ask you for like 1 or 2 sentences on like some advice that you would give to a smaller or medium-sized agency that wants to start doing research and just doesn't know where to start. So like kind of put on your hat, like if you were to get a job at a smaller agency, like what would you start doing in order to build up a research program? And I'm going to start just in order on my screen. So Michael Berman, you're first. Don't overthink it.
I'd start with something that we haven't done here, but I want to do at Sound Transit, which is small, short pulse surveys on topics of interest that generate actionable information. So how clean is this bus? How safe do you feel at this stop? Things like that you can take back and generate action from.
Cool, great. Anne.
I agree with Michael, and I will just say, bringing in the customer perspective to operational questions. So just easy things like, what do riders think about this route, where we have high productivity, for example, just what is the rider experience, and kind of bringing that to operational decisions.
Great. Avi.
So we have a process called the unsolicited proposal process, where we solicit ideas, right, to solve problems. We have kind of experimented that might have an internal solicitation process. And so I think I actually am really keen to that. It would help with building bridges, basically doing a call to what is your problem in your department, and what is your hypothesis or thesis of how to solve it, right? Take internal ideas and maybe kind of sift through those, and then take the top 1 or 2, right, by a voting at the senior leadership, and then come up with a pilot to maybe solve them.
Cool. And John.
For us, it starts with the people. I think bringing in talented, qualitative and quantitative people, research people who understand data, working with data. So for us, it was data scientists and building up a group of data scientists. That is what allowed us to make progress. I think you can't do research without the people who understand data and how to do research.
Makes a lot of sense. And Martha.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with John there. Sort of the 2 questions that we ask a lot in OPMI are, what is good? How are you defining good? And that usually takes actually a lot of research to figure out what good is and how you can put a number to it. And then what is the sentence you are trying to say? Because when you're trying to solve a problem, you've got to communicate it back out to your riders and to leaders. And it really helps if you know what the sentence is and what the numbers in that sentence mean to you. And so sort of just thinking through those two things when asking any question.
Okay, great. Well, I think this has been a really informative session. I myself have really enjoyed talking with all of you. One thing that I'm thinking is that we need some opportunity for agencies to talk to each other more regularly about research and research to practice. I'm like thinking I might want to start up like a research to practice or a transit agency research and Google group that I'll invite all of you to, and then we can cast a wider net similar to other work, and we could kind of do it under the guise of the Transit Data Committee, because I know that research and data go hand in hand. So I think we need to continue. We need to keep these conversations going. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Martha, John, Michael, Anne, and Avital. It was a very fascinating session. Lots came to mind from my own work. So yeah, lots that can be done. That sounds like a great opportunity through that Google group. And thank you so much for your time today.
All right, thank you.
For everybody on the stream, thank you so much for joining us today. Tomorrow we will start at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific with the final day of the symposium, which will focus on transit equity. Bright and early in California, midday for you and on the East Coast. Everybody, please let us know if you have any questions. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow then. Thank you very much.